My boyfriend spent our entire anniversary dinner mocking me in Spanish to his parents. He called me cheap. He said my laugh was annoying. He even laughed when his mother called me a charity case. They clinked their wine glasses and toasted to my ignorance, convinced that the black girl from Detroit could not possibly understand their aristocratic tongue. I just sat there sipping my water and smiling the shy, confused smile they expected. What they did not know was that I speak 4 languages fluently. What they did not know was that I was not there for love anymore. I was there because my private equity firm had just bought their failing family vineyard's debt that morning. I was not their guest. I was their owner. And before I evicted them from the property they had held for generations, I was going to let them dig their own graves. Before I tell you how I turned their arrogance into their absolute destruction, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to play the fool to catch a liar. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Alejandro's leased Mercedes as we pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Rivera estate. Napa Valley stretched out around us in endless rows of green and gold, basking in the California sun. To anyone else, this place looked like paradise. It looked like old money, generational wealth, and the kind of prestige that you simply cannot buy. But to me, looking out the passenger window through my oversized sunglasses, it looked like a balance sheet that was bleeding red ink. My name is Nia. To Alejandro, I am just a freelance HR coordinator who lives in a modest apartment and drives a 5-year-old Honda. I let him believe that I grew up struggling, that I am grateful just to be in his orbit. It makes him feel powerful. It makes him feel like the savior. To the rest of the world, however, I am the founder and majority shareholder of Apex Global, a firm that specializes in acquiring distressed luxury assets. And the Rivera family business was not just distressed, it was on life support. Alejandro reached over and squeezed my knee, flashing that bright, practiced smile that had charmed me 6 months ago. "Nervous, babe?" he asked. "Don't be. My parents can be a little old-fashioned, but they are going to love you. Just let me do the talking, okay? You look beautiful, by the way. Very simple." Simple. That was his code word for cheap. I was wearing a plain black linen dress. No logos, no jewelry except for small pearl studs. He did not know the dress was bespoke, hand-stitched in Milan, and cost more than his car lease payment. He saw what he wanted to see, a woman who needed his guidance. I smiled, that practiced shy curve of my lips that I had perfected over the last few weeks. "I am a little nervous," I admitted, keeping my voice soft. "Your mother sounds very intimidating. I just want to make a good impression." "You will be fine," he assured me, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. "Just remember what I said. Smile, nod, and try not to mention where you grew up. Mom is a little particular about pedigrees." We parked in front of the main villa, a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion that was undeniably breathtaking, even if the stucco was peeling slightly near the roofline. I noticed it immediately. The deferred maintenance, the landscaping that was just a little too overgrown on the edges, the signs of a family that was frantically trying to keep up appearances while drowning in debt. The front door swung open before we even reached the steps. A woman stood there, flanked by 2 stone lions. Camila Rivera was exactly as Alejandro had described her, and exactly what I had seen in the dossiers my team had compiled. She was petite, impeccably dressed in cream silk, with hair so perfectly coiffed it looked like a helmet. She wore enough gold to sink a small ship. Alejandro hurried up the steps to embrace her. "Mama, you look stunning as always." Camila kissed his cheeks, holding him tight before her dark eyes slid over his shoulder and landed on me. She did not smile. She did not wave. She looked at me with the same expression one might use when discovering a stain on a silk rug. Alejandro beckoned me forward. "Mama, this is Nia, the one I told you about." I stepped up, extending my hand. "It is such an honor to meet you, Mrs. Rivera. You have a beautiful home." She took my hand limply, her fingers barely grazing mine, before she pulled away, as if I were contagious. "Thank you," she said in heavily accented English. "It has been in our family for 4 generations." Then, without missing a beat, she turned back to her son. She switched seamlessly into rapid-fire Spanish, her voice dropping an octave, assuming the language barrier was a wall I could not breach. "Another one, Alejandro," she sighed, looking me up and down with open disdain. I told you we need capital, not a charity case. Look at her. She is a morena. She looks like she should be bringing us the hors d'oeuvres, not eating them. Why do you waste your time with these low-class women when the business is crumbling? My heart hammered against my ribs, a hot flash of anger sparking in my chest. Morena. A slur wrapped in a descriptor. She had dismissed my entire existence, my humanity in 2 sentences. But my face remained a mask of polite confusion. I kept my smile fixed, tilting my head slightly as if I were trying hard to follow a conversation I could not possibly understand. Alejandro laughed, a sound that used to make me feel warm but now just sounded like betrayal. "Don't worry, Mama," he replied in Spanish, patting her arm. "She is temporary, but she is useful. She has perfect credit. I am working on getting her to co-sign the loan for the new Porsche. Once I secure that, I will cut her loose. Besides, she pays for everything when we go out. It saves me money." The air in my lungs felt like broken glass. I had suspected Alejandro was using me. My investigators had flagged his gambling debts and his maxed-out credit cards weeks ago. But hearing it out loud, hearing him trade my dignity for a car loan, was a different kind of pain. It was the death of the last tiny hope I had, that maybe, just maybe, his feelings were real. I forced myself to widen my smile. I looked from him to his mother, blinking innocently. "Is everything okay? You sound serious." Alejandro turned to me, his face instantly transforming into a mask of adoration. "Everything is perfect, babe. Mom was just saying how lovely your skin is. She loves your natural look." "Thank you, Mrs. Rivera," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "That is so kind of you." She scoffed a tiny sharp sound and turned on her heel. "Come inside. Jessica and Eduardo are already here. We are just waiting for your father to finish his call with the bank." We followed her into the foyer. It was grand, with a double staircase and a chandelier that probably cost more than my parents' house. But I noticed the dust on the crystals. I noticed the shadow on the wall where a painting had clearly been sold and removed. As we walked toward the living room, a voice rang out from the top of the stairs. "Nia." "Oh my goodness, you must be Nia." I looked up to see a blonde woman descending the stairs. She was draped in turquoise jewelry and wearing a white linen jumpsuit that looked expensive but fit poorly. This was Jessica, the sister-in-law, the wife of Alejandro's younger brother Eduardo. According to my background check, Jessica claimed to be the daughter of a Texas oil tycoon. In reality, her father was a mechanic in Ohio who had filed for bankruptcy 3 times, and she had changed her last name to sound more prestigious. She reached the bottom of the stairs and grabbed my hand, shaking it aggressively. "I am Jessica. I have heard so much about you. Alejandro said you work in... what is it? Human resources." "I work freelance," I said, keeping my tone humble. "I help companies organize their filing systems and manage employee disputes." Jessica's eyes glazed over with boredom instantly. "Oh, how quaint. That sounds very steady. I suppose someone has to do the paperwork." She turned to Camilla, switching to English but speaking slowly and loudly, as if I were not just black, but also hearing impaired. "Do not worry about the room arrangements, Camilla. I told the staff to put Nia's bags in the downstairs suite, the one near the kitchen. It will be easier for her." She winked at me. "It is cozy down there, and you will be close to the snacks." Camilla nodded approvingly. "Good idea. We need the master suites for the important guests coming tomorrow." Alejandro did not object. He did not say, "My girlfriend deserves a proper room." He just shrugged. "That works. Nia is low maintenance. She won't mind." I minded. I minded very much. But I was not here to fight for a room with a view. I was here to assess the collateral on a $50 million default. "That sounds fine," I said. "I do not need much space." "Great," Jessica clapped her hands. "Run along then. Dinner is in an hour." "And Nia, this is a formal house. We dress for dinner. Do you have anything that isn't that?" She gestured vaguely at my dress. "I packed a few things," I said. "I will try to look appropriate." "Good luck," she muttered as she linked arms with Camilla and walked away. Alejandro led me to the suite near the kitchen. It was not a suite. It was the old servants' quarters. It was located down a narrow hallway behind the pantry. The room was small, smelling faintly of bleach and damp earth. The window was a tiny rectangle high on the wall that looked out at the dirt of the garden beds. The bed was a twin mattress on a metal frame. "There you go, babe," Alejandro said, dropping my weekend bag on the floor. "It is actually really private down here. You will get the best sleep." "You are staying here too?" I asked, knowing the answer. He laughed nervously. "Oh no. I have to stay in my old room upstairs. Mom gets offended if I don't. Family tradition, you know, but I will sneak down later." He kissed my forehead, a gesture that now made my skin crawl. "Get changed. Wear that red thing I bought you. It shows off your assets. Mom likes flash." He left, closing the door behind him. I stood in the middle of the cramped, musty room and listened to his footsteps fading away. I waited until I was sure he was gone. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my secure satellite phone. I dialed a number that bypassed the local cell towers. The voice on the other end answered immediately in French. "Oui, Madame President. It was Jean-Luc, my chief of operations in Zurich." "Jean-Luc," I said, my voice dropping the shy, uncertain tremble I had used with the Riveras. Switching to fluent, crisp French, I continued. "I am inside the asset. The physical deterioration is worse than the drone footage suggested. The main house has deferred maintenance. The management is incompetent and hostile." "Bien sûr," Jean-Luc replied. "The acquisition papers are ready for your digital signature. Do we execute the foreclosure notice tonight?" I looked around the tiny, insulting room. I looked at the single flat pillow on the bed. I thought about the way Camila had looked at me like I was dirt. I thought about Alejandro promising his mother he would use me for a car loan. "Not tonight," I said, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time that day. "Let them have their dinner. Let them have their party tomorrow. I want to see how far they will go. I want to see exactly who they are when they think no one is watching." "Understood, madame. And the loan application Mr. Rivera submitted for the Porsche, deny it," I said. "But flag it as pending investigation for fraud. Let him sweat." I hung up the phone and opened my suitcase. I pushed aside the modest clothes I had worn to play the part of the struggling freelancer. Beneath them, tucked away in a hidden compartment, was a dress I had saved for a special occasion. It was not the red thing Alejandro had bought me at the mall. It was a silk gown, midnight blue, structured and sharp as a blade. I wasn't going to wear it tonight. Tonight, I would be the maid they wanted me to be. Tonight, I would listen. I would gather every insult, every slur, every laugh at my expense. I would let them fill my arsenal until it was overflowing. I sat on the edge of the servant's bed and waited for the dinner bell. The walls were thin down here. Above me, I could hear footsteps. I could hear Jessica's shrill laughter. I could hear Alejandro's voice booming. They were walking all over me, quite literally. They thought I was beneath them. They had no idea that they were standing on a trapdoor, and I was the one holding the lever. The dinner bell rang, a sharp, demanding chime. I stood up, smoothed my plain black dress, and put my mask back on. It was showtime. The midday sun over Napa Valley was relentless, beating down on the manicured lawns of the Rivera estate. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer, blurring the lines between the rolling vineyards and the bright blue horizon. To an outsider, the scene on the stone patio looked like a painting of leisure and wealth. A long table draped in white linen had been set under a pergola covered in wisteria. Crystal glasses sparkled, silver cutlery gleamed, and the scent of roasted rosemary chicken wafted from the serving platters. But the atmosphere at the table was anything but peaceful. It was a battlefield, and I was the only one without a weapon. My name is Nia, and I sat at the far end of the table, the spot usually reserved for children or unwanted guests. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my posture perfect, watching the performance unfold. Alejandro sat to my left, but his chair was turned away from me, his body angled entirely toward the head of the table where his mother Camila held court. But Camila was not the star of this particular show. That honor belonged to the woman sitting across from me. Jessica. She was the wife of Eduardo Alejandro's younger brother. She was blonde, tanned to a deep bronze that hinted at too much time in tanning beds, and draped in jewelry that caught the light with every gesture. She leaned back in her chair, holding her wineglass by the bowl rather than the stem, a subtle etiquette failure that a true aristocrat would have noticed. But the Riveras did not notice. They were too busy staring at her like she was a walking, talking bank vault. I reached for the linen napkin on the table, intending to place it on my lap. It was a simple automatic movement. I had dined with ambassadors and heads of state. I knew my way around a formal table setting better than anyone here. Before the fabric even touched my knees, a hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. No! Jessica's voice was loud, sharp, and dripping with exaggerated patience. She held my wrist for a second longer than necessary, her nails digging into my skin before releasing me with a dramatic sigh. She turned to the rest of the table, shaking her head with a small, pitying laugh, then looked back at me. She widened her eyes and slowed her speech, articulating every syllable as if I were a toddler or someone who had suffered a recent head injury. Nia, honey, look at me. Look. She picked up the cloth I had been reaching for and held it up, dangling it between two fingers. This is a napkin. Napkin! You put this on your lap to catch food if you drop it. She then pointed to a smaller, thicker cloth resting on a small silver plate to my left. That is a hand towel. Towel. You use that one to wipe your fingers if they get sticky. Do you understand the difference? I stared at her. The silence at the table was heavy, thick with humidity and malice. Alejandro did not speak. Eduardo smirked into his wineglass. Camilla watched with the cold, impassive gaze of a reptile. Jessica leaned in closer, invading my personal space, her perfume a cloying mix of vanilla and desperation. I know it is confusing, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. In the places you come from, you probably just use paper towels. Or maybe your pants. It is okay, we do not expect you to know these things. The ghetto does not exactly offer classes on fine dining, does it? The word hung in the air. Ghetto. It was lazy. It was racist. It was a calculated attempt to remind everyone of my place. She wanted me to snap. She wanted the angry black woman she had seen in movies. She wanted me to flip the table so she could point a finger and say, "See, she does not belong." I did not give her the satisfaction. I blinked slowly, letting a look of mild confusion wash over my features. I looked at the napkin. I looked at the towel. Then I looked at her with wide, innocent eyes. Oh, I said softly, my voice trembling just enough to sell the act. Thank you, Jessica. I did not know. It is so fancy here. I just do not want to make a mistake. Jessica beamed, preening under the gaze of the family. She patted my hand condescendingly. Do not worry, sweetie. I will help you. That is what family is for. We have to lift each other up, right? She turned back to Camilla, flipping her hair over her shoulder, the mask of the benevolent teacher vanishing instantly to be replaced by the shark. Anyway, Camilla, as I was saying, Daddy called me this morning from the ranch in Texas. He is so worried about your liquidity issues. He told me, Princess, you tell the Riveras that the Parkers do not let family sink. Camilla leaned forward, her eyes hungry. The mention of money acted on her like a drug. Your father is too generous. Jessica. Camilla cooed, her accent thickening as she poured charm over the table. We are just having a temporary cash flow restriction. The vineyard is profitable, of course. We just need a bridge loan to expand. Of course, Jessica nodded vigorously. Daddy knows that. That is why he is authorizing a transfer. $2 million. Just to start. He believes in Eduardo. He believes in this family. He wants us to be partners. Eduardo puffed out his chest, looking around the table, as if he had personally drilled the oil well himself. Sí, Alejandro. Eduardo said in Spanish, sneering at his brother. My wife brings fortune to this house. Yours brings, what? An appetite. Alejandro flushed, his jaw tightening. He did not defend me. He did not look at me. Instead, he turned his charm on Jessica, desperate to get a piece of the imaginary pie she was serving. That is amazing, Jessica, Alejandro said in English, his voice smooth and ingratiating. Your father is a visionary. We should definitely discuss how to allocate that capital. I have some ideas for the distribution network that could double our returns. Jessica waved a hand dismissively. Oh, Daddy wants Eduardo to handle the money, Alejandro. No offense. He just trusts family. And technically, since you are not married yet. She let the sentence trail off, her eyes flicking toward me with amusement. I sat there cutting my chicken into tiny, precise squares. I listened to them fawn over her. I listened to them plan their future with money that did not exist. $2 million from a Texas oil tycoon. It sounded fantastic. It sounded like the answer to all their prayers. There was just one problem. I had grown up in global finance. I knew the smell of old money. It smelled like cedar and silence. It smelled like discretion. Jessica smelled like department store perfume and panic. Her jewelry was flashy, but under the midday sun, the gold lacked the rich luster of high carats. It looked plated. And her story about her father, Daddy, had holes in it big enough to drive a truck through. Oil tycoons did not wire $2 million based on a phone call from their daughter. They used family offices. They used wealth managers. They required due diligence. And they certainly did not let their daughters marry men like Eduardo, a man whose only accomplishment was crashing 3 different luxury cars before his 30th birthday without a prenuptial agreement. I needed to be sure. "Excuse me," I murmured, standing up. Jessica stopped mid-sentence, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Where are you going?" she asked. "We have not finished eating. It is rude to leave the table." "Nature calls," I said, keeping my head down. "I am so sorry." "Go," Camila snapped, waving a hand without looking at me. "Just be quick, and use the guest bathroom off the kitchen. Do not go upstairs." I walked away from the table, feeling their eyes on my back, until I rounded the corner of the house. As soon as I was out of sight, my posture changed. The shy slump vanished. I moved with the silent, predatory grace that had earned me my reputation in the boardroom. I did not go to the kitchen bathroom. I went to the main hallway, slipping into the small powder room beneath the stairs. I locked the door and pulled out my phone. My thumb flew across the screen. I opened my secure messaging app and found the contact for my lead private investigator, a man who could find a needle in a haystack if the haystack was on Mars. I typed the message in French, a habit from my years in boarding school in Geneva, and an extra layer of security in case anyone ever glanced at my screen. Investigate Jessica Parker, claims to be from Texas. Father is allegedly an oil tycoon. Verify assets. Check for bankruptcy filings. Cross-reference with aliases. Something is wrong. She feels like a hustle. I hit send. I washed my hands, staring at myself in the mirror. I saw the anger simmering behind my eyes, but I pushed it down. Not yet. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to think they had won. When I returned to the garden, the mood had shifted to celebration. A bottle of vintage champagne, one of the few real assets the Riveras had left, had been opened. They were toasting. To Jessica, Eduardo shouted, raising his glass. The savior of the Rivera legacy. To Jessica, Camila echoed, clinking her glass against her daughter-in-law's. Alejandro raised his glass too, his smile tight but present. To Jessica. I sat back down. My glass was empty. No one offered to pour me any champagne. Jessica looked at me, her eyes glittering with malice. "Oh, Nia. We would offer you some, but this bottle is worth about $500. I do not think your palate would appreciate it. Stick to the water. It is good for your skin." I picked up my water glass. "You are right, Jessica," I said. "I would hate to waste it." My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single vibration. I did not look at it. I knew what it was. My investigator was fast. The truth was sitting in my pocket, burning a hole through the fabric of my dress. The lunch wound down. The plates were cleared not by staff, but by the awkward silence of the reality that the staff was gone. Camilla stood up, smoothing her silk skirt. "Well, this was lovely. Jessica, darling, come with me to the study. We need to look at the fabric swatches for the renovation. With your father's investment, we can finally redo the east wing." She turned to leave, then stopped, her eyes landing on me. "Nia." "Yes, Mrs. Rivera," I asked. "The maid called in sick this morning," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Probably hungover. You know how they are." She gestured to the table covered in dirty plates, half-eaten chicken carcasses, and wine-stained glasses. "Someone needs to clean this up before the ants come. Since you are staying here for free, and since you did not contribute to the meal, it seems only fair." I stared at her. She wanted me, a guest, the girlfriend of her son, to clear the table and wash the dishes for a party of 6. "Alejandro," I said, looking at him. He looked away, studying his fingernails. "Mom is right, babe. We are all pitching in. Eduardo and I have to go check the vines. It is a family effort. A family effort where I was the only one with dirty hands. You want me to do the dishes, I clarified. If you want to eat dinner tonight, Camila said, her voice hard. In this house, we all earn our keep. Well, those of us who have to earn it. Jessica has already done her part. Now you do yours. She turned and walked away, linking arms with Jessica. I hear lemon juice is great for grease, Jessica called back over her shoulder, laughing. Don't break a nail. Alejandro stood up, patted my shoulder awkwardly, and followed his brother toward the fields. I was alone in the garden. The sun was hot. The smell of leftover food was beginning to turn sickly sweet in the heat. I stood up and began to stack the plates. I would wash their dishes. I would scrub their grease. I would let them treat me like the help. Because every plate I stacked was another line on the invoice I was writing in my head. And when the bill finally came due, the cost was going to be higher than they could ever imagine. I carried the first stack of dirty dishes into the kitchen. As I set them down in the sink, I pulled out my phone and looked at the message from my investigator. It was a single image file, a mugshot. Jessica Parker, arrested 2 years ago in Ohio for check fraud and identity theft. Father listed as Gary Parker, unemployed mechanic. I looked at the mugshot, then out the window at Jessica laughing in the garden. I turned on the faucet. The water ran cold, then hot. Wash the dishes, Nia, I whispered to myself. Wash them clean. Because tonight we are going to serve a very different course. The kitchen of the Rivera estate was a culinary war zone, and I was the only soldier on the front lines. The industrial exhaust fan rattled overhead, doing absolutely nothing to dispel the thick, suffocating heat that radiated from the 2 massive ovens running at full blast. Sweat trickled down my back, ruining the silk lining of a dress that cost more than the commercial mixer sitting on the counter. But I did not stop. I could not stop. In front of me sat a mountain of onions. 50 pounds of yellow onions, their papery skins shedding like confetti all over the floor. Camila had marched in 20 minutes ago, pointed at the sacks, and told me that the base for the soup needed to be prepared immediately. She claimed the sous chef had cut his hand and left. I knew for a fact there was no sous chef. There never had been. This was hazing, plain and simple. I picked up the knife. It was dull. Of course it was dull. A dull knife is dangerous and exhausting, exactly the kind of tool you give to someone you want to see suffer. I began to chop. The fumes hit my eyes, instantly stinging and sharp. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the sweat. I did not wipe them away. I let them fall. It fit the narrative. Poor, overwhelmed Nia crying over onions because she is not cut out for the high life. Behind me, the swinging door pushed open. I did not turn around, but I knew who it was by the smell. Expensive cologne masking the scent of midday whiskey. Alejandro and Eduardo strolled into the kitchen, bringing a burst of laughter with them. They leaned against the marble island, watching me work. They did not offer to help. They did not ask if I needed water. They stood there like patrons at a zoo, observing an animal in its enclosure. Alejandro swirled the ice in his tumbler. He looked at his brother, a smirk playing on his lips. Then he spoke, his voice dropping into that relaxed, arrogant Spanish he saved for when he thought I was deaf to his cruelty. Look at her, he said, gesturing to my back with his glass. Look at the way she handles that knife. It is natural, no, Eduardo snorted, taking a long pull from his drink. It is in the blood, brother. Look at those hands. Those are not the hands of a woman who plays piano or types on a computer. Those are peasant hands. Rough, broad. They are made for scrubbing and chopping. You found yourself a sturdy workhorse, Alejandro. Alejandro laughed, a low, ugly sound. She is useful, I will give her that. And she does not complain. You tell a girl like that to jump, and she asks how high just for the privilege of being in a house like this. I gripped the handle of the knife tighter. My knuckles turned white. Peasant hands. Workhorse. I looked down at my hands. They were strong, yes. But they were also the hands that had signed a merger acquisition worth $300 million last month. They were the hands that held the pen which had just authorized the hostile takeover of a tech giant in Silicon Valley. They were hands that could crush the Rivera family legacy into dust without breaking a nail. But I did not turn around. I did not throw the knife. I kept chopping, rhythmically, hypnotically, slice, slice, slice. I stopped for a moment to wipe my forehead with the back of my wrist, letting out a shaky breath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wireless earbuds. I placed them in my ears, making a show of tapping my phone screen. "Just some music," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I glanced over my shoulder at them. "It helps me focus." Alejandro waved his hand dismissively. "Whatever gets the job done, babe. Just make sure those are diced fine. Mama hates chunks." He turned back to Eduardo, switching to Spanish again. "See? Simple pleasures for simple minds. Give her a little music, and she forgets she is doing the work of 3 servants." I tapped the screen again. I was not playing music, I was dialing into a secure conference bridge. The connection clicked, and a cool, professional voice filled my ears. It was Sarah, my chief financial officer in New York. "Madame President," Sarah said, "we have the board assembled. We are waiting for your final authorization on the Rivera file." I resumed chopping. The rhythmic thud of the knife against the cutting board masked my voice as I spoke softly, barely moving my lips. "Go ahead, Sarah. I am listening." The background noise of the kitchen, the humming fridge, the rattling fan, the chatter of the brothers behind me, it all faded. I was no longer in a hot kitchen in Napa. I was in my element. Sarah continued. "We have analyzed their liquidity. It is worse than we thought. They have leveraged the estate 3 times over. They are currently floating checks between 4 different banks to keep the lights on. The loan for the anniversary party was denied this morning, but they managed to secure a high-interest predatory loan from a private lender an hour ago, just to pay for the catering." I sliced an onion in half. The layers fell apart. "They are bleeding out," I whispered. "Yes," Sarah replied. "The bank is ready to move on the default notice. We own the debt now. We can trigger the acceleration clause at any moment. That means they would have to pay the full $50 million immediately or forfeit the assets. Do you want to pull the trigger?" I paused. I listened to Alejandro behind me. He was telling Eduardo about the new watch he planned to buy once he got access to my credit line. He was bragging about how easy I was to manipulate. "Not yet," I murmured. "Let them have their party. Let them toast to their success in front of all their friends and business partners. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel like they got away with it." "Understood," Sarah said. "What about the operational accounts?" "Freeze them," I said, slicing through the root of the onion. "Freeze everything. When they try to run their cards tomorrow morning, I want them to decline. I want every single transaction to bounce. I want them to wake up to a financial ice age." "Done," Sarah said. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "The private lender they used for the catering. Buy that note too. I want to own every single cent of debt attached to this name. I want to own the food in their mouths and the wine in their glasses." "Consider it done, Madam President." I tapped the earbud, ending the call. I took a deep breath. The tears in my eyes were real, but they weren't from the onions anymore. They were from the sheer adrenaline-fueled anticipation of the kill. Alejandro and Eduardo finished their drinks and left the kitchen complaining about the heat. They left their empty glasses on the counter for me to clean. I finished the onions. I washed the glasses. I scrubbed the countertops until they gleamed. Then Camilla marched into the kitchen. She looked frantic, her helmet of hair slightly askew. "Nia," she barked. "Why are you so slow? The caterers are arriving in an hour to set up the serving stations. I need you to check the pantry. We need the saffron and the truffle oil. Get them out." She pointed a manicured finger toward the walk-in pantry at the back of the kitchen. I wiped my hands on my apron and obeyed. The pantry was cool and dark, lined with shelves of dry goods. It smelled of spices and old wood. I reached for the tin of saffron on the middle shelf. As I moved the tin, something scurried across my hand. I gasped and recoiled, dropping the tin. It clattered to the floor. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and shone it into the corner of the shelf. There were dozens of them. Cockroaches. Big, dark, oily ones. They were swarming over a bag of rice that had split open. They were crawling in and out of a box of crackers. Droppings littered the shelves. It was an infestation, a severe one. I felt bile rise in my throat. This was the food they were planning to serve to 50 of the most influential people in the valley. This was the kitchen of a luxury estate. Mrs. Rivera. I called out, backing out of the pantry. Camilla appeared in the doorway, looking annoyed. What did you drop? Saffron is expensive, you clumsy girl." "Look," I said, pointing the flashlight beam at the shelf. "There are roaches everywhere. They are in the food." Camilla stepped forward and looked. She saw the bugs scattering under the light. Her face did not register horror. It did not register disgust. It registered calculation. She turned to me, her eyes hard as flint. "Close the door," she hissed. "But the food," I stammered. "We cannot serve this. It is contaminated. We have to throw it out." "Throw it out!" she shrieked, her voice low and venomous. "Are you insane? Do you know how much this inventory costs? We do not have time to replace it. The guests are arriving in 2 hours." She grabbed the door handle and slammed the pantry shut. "You saw nothing," she said, stepping into my personal space. "This is an old house. Sometimes there are bugs. It happens. You will take the saffron. You will wipe the tin off with a sanitizer wipe. And you will bring it to the chef." I stared at her. This was not just negligence. This was a health hazard. This was dangerous. "Mrs. Rivera," I said, dropping the act for a split second. "People could get sick." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little thing. You are here because my son has a soft spot for strays. Do not make me regret letting you in. You will keep your mouth shut. You will not ruin this night. You will not spoil the guests' appetite with your dramatic stories. Do you understand? If you say one word, I will tell Alejandro to leave you at the bus station tonight." She released me and smoothed her dress. "Now, clean the tin, bring the oil, and fix your face. You look like a tragedy." She turned and marched out of the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, listening to the scuttling sounds from behind the pantry door. I looked at the closed door. I looked at my phone. Camilla thought she had silenced me. She thought fear of losing Alejandro would keep me quiet. She did not know that I had already lost him the moment he laughed at me in the car. I opened the pantry door again. I raised my phone. I took a picture, then another, then a video zooming in on the vermin crawling over the open bag of premium basmati rice. I captured the brand names. I captured the expiration dates. I captured the undeniable squalor hidden behind the veneer of wealth. I saved the files to my secure cloud. I sent a copy to my investigator with a simple caption, "Leverage." Then I picked up the saffron tin. I grabbed a sanitizer wipe. I wiped it down, just as I was told. I walked out of the pantry, my face a mask of obedience. "Yes, Mrs. Rivera," I whispered to the empty room. "I will not spoil their appetite. Not yet. I will let them eat. I will let them drink. And tomorrow, when the health inspectors arrive with the photos I just took, they are going to choke on every single bite." The afternoon sun had begun to dip behind the rolling hills of the vineyard, casting long shadows across the Rivera estate. The house was buzzing with a frantic energy as the final preparations for the anniversary gala kicked into high gear. Caterers were shouting instructions in the hallway. Florists were hauling in massive arrangements of white lilies that smelled like a funeral parlor. And I was standing in the shadows of the library, trying to disappear. I had finished my shift in the kitchen, scoured the grease from my fingernails, and changed back into my simple black dress. My hands still smelled faintly of bleach and onions, a scent that seemed to cling to me like a second skin, marking me as the help regardless of what I wore. I was exhausted, but my mind was razor sharp. I was not here to rest. I was here to watch the house of cards fall. Alejandro found me there. He slipped into the library, closing the heavy oak door behind him with a soft click. The noise of the house faded, instantly replaced by the smell of old paper and dust. He looked frantic. His hair was perfectly styled, but there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip that betrayed his nerves. He adjusted his silk tie, smoothing it down with a trembling hand before fixing a smile on his face. It was the smile he used when he wanted something, the smile that had worked on me for 6 months. "Nia, baby? There you are," he said, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "I have been looking everywhere for you. Are you okay?" "Mom can be a little intense in the kitchen, I know. I tried to tell her you needed a break, but she is so stressed about tonight." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had thought I loved, and I saw nothing but a stranger in an expensive suit. I saw a man who had watched me scrub floors and chop onions without lifting a finger. I saw a coward. "I am fine, Alejandro," I said, keeping my voice small and tired. "I just wanted to stay out of the way until the guests arrive." Good," he said, distracting himself. "Listen, babe, I have a huge favor to ask, a really big one, and I would not ask if I was not desperate. He took my hands in his. His palms were damp. He looked deep into my eyes, trying to summon that old magic, that connection that used to make my knees weak. I found the perfect gift for Mom. He said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is a vintage emerald necklace. She has been talking about it for years. The jeweler just called me. He is holding it, but he needs payment now if I want to present it to her tonight. It is the big 40th anniversary, Nia. It has to be perfect. That sounds lovely, I said, playing along. So go get it. He sighed, a dramatic exhale that ruffled his bangs. That is the problem. I tried to wire the money, but my bank flagged the transaction as suspicious because I am out of town. They froze my accounts for 24 hours. I have been on the phone with them for an hour, but they say it is a security protocol. They cannot unlock it until tomorrow. He squeezed my hands tighter. I need you to spot me, Nia. Just until tomorrow morning. As soon as the bank opens, I will wire it back to you with interest, I promise. How much? I asked, blinking innocently. $10,000, he said, the number rolling off his tongue a little too quickly. I hesitated. I let the silence stretch out. I let him sweat. I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted to see if he would beg. 10,000, Alejandro, I said, biting my lip. That is a lot of money. That is almost all of my savings. You know I have been saving for a new car. I know, babe, I know, he pleaded. And I swear on my life you will get it back. Plus a little extra for being the best girlfriend in the world. Please, Nia, do this for me. Do this for the family. If I show up tonight without a gift after Jessica gave them that huge check, I will look like a failure. Mom will never let me hear the end of it. Do you want that? Do you want them to look down on us? Us. There was no us. There was only him, and the ATM he thought he was talking to. I looked at his desperate eyes. I knew the truth. His accounts were not frozen for security. They were frozen because he was overdrawn. He had maxed out his credit lines, gambling on sports, and buying bottle service at clubs to impress people who did not care about him. There was no necklace. There was only a bookie or a debt he needed to clear before the party started. But I needed the transaction record. I needed the paper trail. Okay, I whispered, letting my shoulders slump as if I were giving in against my better judgment. Okay, Alejandro. For you. He let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. Thank you. Thank you, Nia. You are saving my life. I pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app. He watched me over my shoulder, his eyes greedy, tracking my fingers as I typed in the amount. $10,000. Sent. The notification chimed on his phone a second later. He checked the screen and his entire demeanor changed. The desperation vanished, replaced by a smug satisfaction. He kissed my cheek quickly, almost carelessly. You are amazing, he said, already backing toward the door. I have to go pick it up. I will see you at dinner. Wear the red dress, okay? He slipped out of the library, leaving me alone in the gloom. I waited 5 seconds. Then I followed him. I moved silently, my flat shoes making no sound on the parquet floor. I did not follow him to the front door where his car was parked. I followed him to the side terrace, a secluded spot hidden by a wall of ivy, where the cell reception was best. I stood just inside the French doors, hidden by the heavy velvet drapes. I could see him through the crack in the curtains. He was pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in Spanish, loud and fast. Sophia, baby, pickup. He paused, listening. Then he laughed. A cruel, triumphant sound. Yes, I got it. I told you I would get it. The idiot transferred it 2 minutes ago. She bought the whole story about the necklace. Can you believe it? Leave. She thinks she is saving the day. He paused again, listening to the voice on the other end. I know. Listen, book the suite at the Hilton, the presidential. I will slip away after the toasts. My family will be too drunk to notice, and Nia will be in bed by 10. She is exhausted. I had her scrubbing floors all day. He laughed again. Yes, 10,000. It is enough for tonight and for that bracelet you wanted. I will bring cash. I love you, baby. See you in 3 hours. He hung up. He adjusted his jacket, checked his reflection in the glass of the door, and walked away whistling. I stood there in the shadows, feeling a cold calm settle over me. Sophia. The mistress. The one he was spending my money on while I slept in the servant quarters. He was not buying a gift for his mother. He was buying a night with another woman using the money he had swindled from me. I pulled out my phone. I had recorded every word. The voice memo was saved and uploaded to my secure cloud instantly. I opened my banking app and took a screenshot of the transfer confirmation. I annotated it with the time and date. I did not call the bank to reverse the charge. I did not report it as fraud. Not yet. That money was not a loss. It was an investment. It was the price of admission for the show I was about to put on. $10,000 was a cheap price to pay for absolute moral high ground in a court of law. I turned to go back to my room. As I walked down the hallway, my phone buzzed with a priority notification. It was from my private investigator. The subject line read simply, Jessica Parker, background check complete. I hurried to the small damp room that had been assigned to me. I sat on the lumpy mattress and opened the file. The first page was a summary, and it was devastating. Jessica Parker. Born Jessica Pokorsky in Dayton, Ohio. Father Gary Pokorsky, former mechanic, currently unemployed. He had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 3 times in the last decade. His most recent address was a trailer park outside of Cleveland. There was no oil tycoon. There was no ranch in Texas. There was no trust fund. I scrolled down. Jessica had 5 outstanding judgments against her for unpaid credit card debt totaling over $80,000. She had been evicted from 2 different apartments in Los Angeles before meeting Eduardo. She was currently being sued by a wedding planner for non-payment of services. She was not a savior. She was a parasite. She was exactly like the Riveras, drowning in debt and pretending to float on a yacht. The $2 million transfer she had promised at lunch. It was a phantom. It would never arrive because it did not exist. She was stalling, playing for time, hoping to marry Eduardo and get her name on the deed to the vineyard before anyone realized she was destitute. She did not know the vineyard was already gone. She did not know she was trying to marry into a crater. I looked at the mugshot included in the file. Jessica looking tired and angry, holding a slate with booking numbers. I looked at the recording of Alejandro on my phone. I looked at the bank transfer receipt. I had them. I had all of them. I lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The dinner was in 2 hours. 2 hours until the curtain rose. I stood up and went to my suitcase. I unzipped the hidden lining. I pulled out the midnight blue silk gown. It pooled in my hands, cool and heavy like water. I pulled out the diamond earrings I had hidden inside a pair of socks. Real diamonds, flawless and sharp. I pulled out my makeup kit. I stripped off the plain black dress. I showered in the tiny, cramped stall, scrubbing the scent of onions from my skin until I felt raw. I did not put on the red dress Alejandro had asked for. I put on the silk gown. It fit me like armor. I swept my hair up, revealing my neck. I put on the diamonds. I applied my makeup, highlighting my eyes, making them look fierce and bright. I looked in the mirror. The shy, freelance HR coordinator was gone. The woman staring back at me was the president of Apex Global. She was a woman who spoke 4 languages. She was a woman who controlled assets worth billions. She was a woman who had just paid $10,000 to watch a man destroy himself. I checked the time. It was almost sunset. I picked up my clutch. Inside was my phone with the recording and the digital file on Jessica. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the house had changed. The frantic energy of preparation had settled into the heavy, expectant hush of the main event. I walked toward the stairs. My heels clicked on the stone floor, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of war. Alejandro wanted a show. Camila wanted a servant. Jessica wanted a victim. Tonight, I was going to give them all exactly what they deserved. I walked up the stairs out of the darkness of the servant quarters and into the light of the main hall. The party was starting, and I was ready to serve the first course. The great hall of the Rivera estate had been transformed into a theater of excess. 50 guests filled the room, a curated collection of Napa Valley's elite desperate creditors and business rivals who had come to smell the blood in the water. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with silver candelabras and white roses. A string quartet played in the corner, their music struggling to rise above the din of polite, predatory conversation. I stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, letting the scene absorb me. I had shed the skin of the humble freelancer. The midnight blue silk gown I wore was a weapon. It had no label, no flashy logo, and no sequins. It was architectural structured and fit me with a precision that screamed bespoke Italian tailoring to anyone who knew what they were looking at. To the Riveras who measured wealth by the size of a brand name printed on a chest, I probably looked invisible. That was exactly the point. I was a stealth bomber in a room full of fireworks. I descended the stairs. My heels struck the marble with a deliberate rhythmic click that cut through the chatter. Heads turned. I saw men in tuxedos pause mid-sip. I saw women in taffeta narrow their eyes, trying to place me, trying to figure out why the woman who had been introduced as a charity case was walking like she owned the building. Alejandro was at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up, and for a second his mask slipped. He looked stunned. He looked like a man who had just realized the stray cat he adopted was actually a panther. But then he remembered who he was supposed to be. He remembered the $10,000 I had wired him. He remembered that I was his ATM, not his equal. He stepped forward, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Wow," he said, his voice low. "You clean up nice, Nia. I didn't know you had a dress like that. Did you find it at a thrift store? It fits surprisingly well." "It was a gift," I lied smoothly, my face a mask of serene innocence. "From a former employer. I saved it for a special occasion." He nodded, losing interest immediately. "Well, try to blend in. Don't speak unless someone speaks to you first. We have important people here tonight. Investors." Before I could reply, Camilla materialized out of the crowd. She was wearing a red dress that was too tight and too bright, clashing violently with the subtle elegance of the room. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a sneer that she didn't bother to hide. "So you decided to join us," she said. "I suppose you expect to be fed after your little performance in the pantry." I smiled at her. It was the smile of a shark who sees a seal splashing on the surface. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Mrs. Rivera." She huffed, turning her back on me. "Well, we have a problem. The seating chart is very strict. We have important partners from the bank and the distribution firms. There is no room at the main tables for extras." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the room near the swinging kitchen doors. "I have set up a place for you at table 19. It is with the children and the au pairs. You will be more comfortable there. The conversation at the main tables will be business. It would go over your head." I looked where she was pointing. Table 19 was a small round folding table that had been hastily covered with a tablecloth that didn't quite reach the floor. It was situated directly next to the service station, where waiters were dumping half-eaten food into bins. 3 toddlers in high chairs were currently screaming and throwing bread rolls, while 2 exhausted nannies tried to calm them down. She was putting me at the kids' table. She was seating the woman who held the deed to her house next to the garbage. It was perfect. It was so petty, so small, and so indicative of her character that I almost thanked her. "That sounds lovely," I said. "I love children." "Good," Camilla snapped. "Go sit, and do not wander around. You are distracting the staff." I walked to table 19. I sat down on a folding chair that wobbled slightly. I placed my clutch on the table, careful to keep it away from a spilled juice box. From this vantage point, I had a clear view of the head table. It was elevated on a small dais like a throne room. Alejandro sat there. Eduardo sat there. Jessica sat there, shimmering in a gold dress that looked like it was made of candy wrappers. And Luis the patriarch sat in the center, looking like a king whose kingdom was burning down around him. The dinner service began. Waiters rushed past me, ignoring my empty glass, carrying plates of filet mignon and lobster to the dais. I was served a plate of cold chicken and rubbery green beans, clearly the staff meal. I ate it slowly. It tasted like fuel. I needed the energy. Halfway through the meal, the music stopped. A hush fell over the room. Luis Rivera stood up. He tapped a spoon against his crystal glass. The sound rang out sharp and demanding. "My friends," Luis boomed, his voice projected by a microphone that screeched slightly with feedback. "Thank you for coming to celebrate 40 years of the Rivera legacy." He raised his glass. His hand was shaking. I knew why. I knew that his phone had been ringing all day with calls from creditors that he was ignoring. He was putting on the performance of his life. "We have faced challenges this year," Luis continued, his eyes darting around the room, trying to make eye contact with the bankers who were currently chewing their steak and judging his liquidity. "But the Rivera name is strong. We are expanding, we are growing, and we are doing it because of family." He gestured to his right where Jessica sat preening. "I want to make a special toast to my daughter-in-law Jessica. She has brought a new energy to this family. She comes from a lineage of Texas Titans, and her family's generous partnership is going to launch us into the stratosphere. Jessica, you are the daughter we always prayed for, the golden thread that binds our future." Jessica stood up and waved blowing kisses to the crowd. She looked like a pageant queen who had just won a title she bought. The crowd applauded politely, but I saw the glances exchanged between the businessmen. They knew. They had run the same background checks I had. They knew she was a fraud, and they were watching Luis praise her with a mix of amusement and pity. Luis turned to his left. "And to my son Alejandro, my heir, the man who will carry this vineyard into the next century. He has secured new distribution channels. He has the vision. He has the drive." Alejandro stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked the part. Tall, handsome, confident. He looked like a success story. He did not look like a man who had stolen $10,000 from his girlfriend to pay for a prostitute 3 hours ago. "To the future," Luis shouted. "To the future," the room echoed. I raised my water glass. "To the future," I whispered. Luis sat down. The tension in his shoulders did not abate. The performance was over, but the reality was setting in. The family relaxed. They thought the hard part was done. They thought they had sold the lie. They leaned in toward each other at the head table. They thought they were in a private bubble elevated above the commoners. They forgot that sound carries. They forgot that I was sitting 10 feet away just below the dais, invisible to them, but perfectly positioned to hear everything. They switched to Spanish. It was immediate. It was a release. It was their safe space where they could shed the mask of politeness and be their true ugly selves. Camila leaned over to Alejandro, gesturing toward me with her fork. "Look at her," she sneered in Spanish, her voice carrying clearly over the low hum of the room. "Look at the way she eats that chicken. She cuts it like she is afraid it is going to bite her back. It is pathetic. She sits there among the babies, and she fits right in. She has the mind of a child." I kept my face blank. I chewed a piece of rubbery green bean. I stared straight ahead. Eduardo laughed, slinging an arm around the back of Jessica's chair. "It is embarrassing," Brother Eduardo said in Spanish. "Having her here, it lowers the tone of the entire event. The investors are looking at her and wondering why we let the help sit down. When are you going to dump her? Do not let her cling to the family assets. If she thinks she is getting a ring, you need to wake her up. We cannot have that bloodline mixing with ours." Jessica giggled. She didn't speak Spanish, but she knew they were mocking me. She chimed in with English loud enough for me to hear. "Aw, look at her. She looks so lonely. Maybe we should send her a coloring book." Alejandro looked down at me from the dais. He looked at the woman who had paid his rent for 6 months. He looked at the woman whose money was currently paying for the hotel room he planned to visit later that night. His eyes were cold. There was no love there. There was only calculation. He took a sip of his wine and spoke in Spanish, his voice dripping with contempt. "Don't worry, Mama. Tonight is the end of it. As soon as the party is over, I am kicking her out. I just need to make sure the wire transfer she sent clears the bank fully. Once the cash is liquid, she is gone. She is just a mobile ATM, and I have already made my withdrawal. A mobile ATM." The words hit me in the chest, but they didn't hurt. They solidified. They turned the last remaining molecules of my compassion into steel. They laughed, all of them. Camila, Luis, Eduardo, Alejandro. They clinked their glasses again, toasting to my exploitation. Toasting to their cleverness. Toasting to the stupid, silent black girl who paid their bills and scrubbed their floors. I put down my fork. I picked up my napkin. I dabbed the corners of my mouth. I looked at the time on my phone. The notifications were lined up. The bank transfers were frozen. The foreclosure notice was digital and ready. The police were on standby for Jessica. The stage was set. They wanted a show. They wanted to talk about bloodlines and assets. They wanted to talk about who belonged at the head table. I pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through their laughter. They looked down at me, annoyed that the furniture was making noise. I stood up. I smoothed the silk of my midnight blue gown. I picked up my crystal water glass. I walked toward the dais. I did not walk with my head down. I did not walk with a shuffle. I walked with the stride of a CEO, entering a boardroom to fire everyone. Camila frowned. "What is she doing?" she hissed in Spanish. "Sit down, girl," I ignored her. I walked up the 3 steps to the dais. I stood at the end of their table. I towered over them as they sat. I tapped my glass with my fingernail. Ding, ding, ding. The room went silent. The guests turned. They saw the woman from table 19 standing over the family. They sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure. They knew something was about to happen. Alejandro looked panicked. "Nia, babe, what are you doing?" "Sit down. You're drunk." I smiled at him. It was a terrifying smile. "I am not drunk, Alejandro," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without a microphone. "I am just finally ready to join the conversation." I turned my gaze to Camilla. I locked eyes with her, and then I opened my mouth. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy. It was pressurized. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a dam breaks, when the water is pushing against the concrete with millions of gallons of force, and the first hairline fracture appears. I stood at the edge of the dais, looking down at the Rivera family. From this angle, they looked small. They looked like dolls arranged in a dollhouse that I was about to set on fire. Alejandro was half standing, his hand reaching out as if to physically pull me back down to the floor, back down to my place. His face was a mask of panic and annoyance. He thought I was going to make a scene. He thought I was going to cry about not sitting at the big table. He thought I was going to embarrass him with some low-class display of emotion that would confirm everything he had just whispered to his mother. "Nia, please," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "You are making a fool of yourself. Go back to your seat. We will talk about this later." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had slept in my bed, eaten my food, and spent my money for 6 months. I looked at the man who had just promised his mother he would discard me like trash as soon as my check cleared. I did not sit down. I did not retreat. I raised the crystal glass in my hand. It caught the light of the chandeliers, sending a prism of rainbows dancing across the white tablecloth. "I am sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice clear and steady in English. The room was so quiet that my voice carried to the back corners without a microphone. "I just wanted to propose a toast, to the Rivera family, and to the truth." Camila rolled her eyes. She picked up her wine glass, clearly intending to ignore me until I went away. She muttered something to Eduardo in Spanish, a quick biting comment about how alcohol makes the help get uppity. That was the moment. That was the trigger. I took a deep breath. I let the air fill my lungs. I let the shy, stumbling American girl die right there on the dais. And when I exhaled, I did not speak English. I spoke Spanish. But I did not speak the casual, regional dialect the Riveras used. I did not speak the slang-heavy street Spanish Alejandro used with his friends. I spoke Castilian. Pure, crisp European Spanish. The kind of Spanish I had learned from my private tutors in Madrid during the summers I spent there as a teenager. The kind of Spanish that pronounces the Z and the C with a distinct, elegant lisp. The kind of Spanish that sounds like old money. It sounds like royalty. It sounds like power. Señora Camila. I began my diction perfect, my tone conversational but ice cold. "I must apologize. I did not finish my dinner." Camila froze. The glass of wine she was raising to her lips stopped in midair. Her eyes snapped to mine. For a second she looked confused, as if her brain could not process the sounds coming out of my mouth. I continued, letting the beautiful sharp syllables roll off my tongue. "You see, the chicken was cold. But the soup was the real problem. It was incredibly salty, almost bitter." I leaned in closer, resting one hand on the edge of their table. "It reminded me of the comments you have been making about my skin color for the last 48 hours. Salty, bitter, and entirely tasteless. The sound of a pin dropping would have sounded like a gunshot in that room." Camilla's mouth fell open. Her face drained of color so fast it looked like the blood had simply evaporated from her body. She stared at me, her eyes wide, terrified, uncomprehending. I did not stop. I did not give her time to recover. I pivoted slightly, turning my gaze to the 50 guests watching us with rapt attention. Many of them spoke Spanish. I saw the recognition on their faces. I saw the shock. I saw the realization dawn on the bankers and the investors that the girl at the kids' table was not who they thought she was. I continued addressing Camilla, keeping my voice pleasant, as if we were discussing the weather. You called me a morena with such disgust when I arrived. You said I looked like I should be serving the hors d'oeuvres. You said I had the mind of a child. I paused, letting a small, cold smile touch my lips. It is interesting, Camilla. For a woman who claims to care so much about pedigree and breeding, your manners are surprisingly peasant. In my family, we do not insult guests in a language we assume they do not speak. We call that cowardice. And we do not serve saffron that has been crawling with cockroaches even to the help. A gasp rippled through the room. Several guests put down their forks. Camilla made a choking sound. She tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to fail her. She slumped back into her chair, clutching her chest. Lies, she gasped in English, her voice shrill and weak. She is lying. She is crazy. I ignored her. I turned my attention to Eduardo. He was staring at me with his mouth agape, a piece of steak halfway to his mouth. And Eduardo, I said, switching back to my flawless Castilian. You asked your brother earlier when he was going to kick me out. You were worried I would cling to the family assets. You were concerned about my bloodline mixing with yours. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time. It was the laugh of someone who knows the punchline to a joke no one else gets. Eduardo, look at yourself. You are wearing a suit that does not fit. You are drinking champagne you cannot afford. And you are married to a woman whose father is not an oil tycoon, but a mechanic who has filed for bankruptcy 3 times. I glanced at Jessica. She was looking back and forth between us, panic rising in her eyes. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. She understood that the predator had just entered the room. Eduardo Puy continued. You do not have any assets for me to cling to. Your family is destitute. You are drowning in $50 million of debt. You are not protecting a legacy. You are protecting a corpse. Eduardo dropped his fork. It clattered against the fine china, a harsh, discordant note in the silence. He looked at Jessica, then back at me, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Finally, I turned to Alejandro. He was still standing. He was pale. Sweat was beading on his forehead, running down his temples. He looked at me like I was a ghost. He looked at me like I was a monster. Alejandro, I said softly. My love. He flinched at the endearment. You called me a mobile ATM, I said, savoring the words. You told your mother that as soon as the wire transfer cleared, you were going to dump me. You said I was just a temporary fix, a useful idiot. I took a step closer to him. He took a step back, bumping into his chair. Well, I have some bad news for you, Alejandro. I reached into my clutch. I pulled out my phone. I held it up so he could see the screen. It showed the banking app. It showed the transfer of $10,000. And then with a single tap of my thumb, I swiped to the next image. It was a notification from the bank. Transaction cancelled. Fraud alert triggered. You see, Alejandro. I continued in Spanish, my voice hardening into steel. The ATM is out of order. It just swallowed your card. And that $10,000 you thought you stole to pay for your hotel room with Sophia tonight. It is gone. It never left my account. I flagged it as fraudulent 5 minutes after I sent it. Alejandro's knees gave out. He collapsed into his chair, his hands gripping the tablecloth. Sophia, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Yes, Sophia, I said. The mistress you called from the terrace. The one you laughed with about how stupid I was. I recorded that call, Alejandro. I recorded everything. I turned back to the crowd. I switched to English now, making sure every single person in the room, from the waiters to the bank presidents, heard me clearly. I apologize for the disruption, everyone. But I thought it was important to clarify a few things before we continue this celebration of the Rivera legacy. I gestured to the family sitting stunned and broken on the dais. This family is not successful. They are frauds. They are racists. And they are broke. I looked at the bankers at table 1. Gentlemen, if you are holding debt on this estate, I suggest you call your legal departments. Because the collateral you think is securing your loans, it is rotting from the inside out. I looked at the distribution partners at table 2. And if you are planning to sign contracts with Alejandro based on his vision, I would advise against it. His vision mostly involves gambling away operating capital and lying to women to pay his car notes. The room erupted. It wasn't applause. It was the sound of chaos. Chairs scraped back, voices rose in shock and outrage, phones were pulled out, people were recording. The facade of the Rivera dynasty had been shattered in less than 5 minutes, and I was standing in the center of the wreckage holding the hammer. Camilla found her voice. It was a screech, a primal sound of fury and humiliation. "Get out!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "Get out of my house, you devil, you liar! Get out!" I looked at her finger. I looked at her red, blotchy face. "I am afraid I cannot do that." "Camilla," I said calmly. "Why not?" she shrieked. "This is my house, I want you gone." I shook my head slowly. "No, Camilla. That is the other thing I needed to tell you." I reached into my clutch again. I pulled out a folded document. It was thick. It was legal. It had a blue cover sheet. I unfolded it and placed it gently on the table in front of Luis, right next to his empty wine glass. "This is not your house," I said. Luis looked down at the document. He put on his reading glasses with trembling hands. He read the header. His face went gray. "What is this?" he whispered. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that only the family could hear. "That is a deed transfer," I said. "My company Apex Global acquired your debt portfolio this morning. We bought the note from the private lender you used for the catering. We bought the mortgage from the bank. We own the paper on the tractors, the vines, and the roof over your head." I stood up straight, smoothing my dress. "So technically, Camilla, you are the one who is trespassing, and unless you want me to call the sheriff to enforce an immediate eviction, I suggest you sit down, shut up, and let me finish my dinner. I hear the dessert is to die for, assuming of course the cockroaches didn't get to it first." Luis looked up at me. There was no arrogance left in his eyes. There was only fear. "Who are you?" he asked. I smiled. It was the smile I had been hiding for 48 hours. "I am Nia," I said. "I am the Morena you thought was too stupid to understand your insults. I am the charity case you thought you could exploit." I picked up my wine glass again and took a sip of water. "And now, I am your landlord." I turned my back on them and walked down the stairs of the dais. I did not go back to the kids' table. I walked to the center of the room, pulled out a chair at the empty table reserved for VIPs, and sat down. I crossed my legs. I placed my clutch on the table. I looked at the waiter standing nearby who was staring at me with his mouth open. "Excuse me," I said politely. "Could I have a glass of the vintage champagne now? I believe I can afford it." The waiter scrambled to obey. Behind me on the stage, the Rivera family was imploding. Jessica was screaming at Eduardo. Alejandro had his head in his hands. Camila was sobbing. And Luis was staring at the legal document as if it were a death sentence. It was. The dinner was over. The feast had just begun, and I was starving. The room was spinning in a vortex of shattered glass and shattered egos, but one person was still desperately trying to cling to the wreckage of the Titanic while rearranging the deck chairs. Jessica stood up, her chair screeching against the marble floor, a sound that grated on every nerve in the room. She did not speak Spanish, so she had missed the nuances of my conversation with Alejandro. She had missed the part where I revealed myself as the predator. All she saw was the black girl from the servants' quarters standing on the dais making a scene, and she saw an opportunity to be the hero. She smoothed her gold dress, the cheap sequins catching the light in a way that looked garish rather than glamorous. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. "Security!" she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "Where is the security? Someone get this woman out of here immediately. She is drunk and she is dangerous. Look at her. She is threatening the family." She looked around the room, seeking allies among the stunned guests. "I am so sorry, everyone," she announced, breathless with performative panic. "We tried to help her. We gave her a place to stay, and this is how she repays us. By making a scene at a formal event. It is just so typical." She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. "You need to leave, Nia. Right now. Go back to your little apartment or your car or wherever you came from. You do not belong here. You are ruining a celebration of excellence." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had held my wrist and taught me how to use a napkin. I looked at the woman who had called me a charity case. And then I laughed. It was a soft sound, but in the dead silence of the room it carried like a thunderclap. "Oh, Jessica. I said, my voice dropping to a conversational purr that was far more terrifying than a shout. You really do not know when to stop digging, do you? I reached into my clutch, but instead of my phone this time, I pulled out a small black remote control. Earlier that afternoon, while the caterers were setting up, I had taken a moment to sync my phone with the estate's audio-visual system. It was a simple Bluetooth handshake. The Riveras had installed a massive projection screen behind the dais, intended for a slideshow of their glorious family history. They wanted to show off 40 years of success. I pointed the remote at the ceiling. I think you are right, Jessica, I said. We should talk about excellence. We should talk about pedigree. We should talk about where we come from. I pressed the button. A motorized hum filled the room as the massive white screen descended from the ceiling behind the head table. The lights in the hall dimmed automatically. The guests turned their chairs expecting a montage of vintage wine harvests and family weddings. Instead, a giant high-definition image filled the screen. It was a mugshot. Jessica Parker. But the name on the booking slate did not say Parker. It said Pawkorski. The room gasped. Jessica froze. Her hand went to her throat, clutching her fake diamond necklace. Her eyes bulged. I pressed the button again. The slide changed. This is Gary Pawkorski. I narrated, my voice cool and professional, like I was delivering a quarterly earnings report. He is Jessica's father. The image showed a man in grease-stained coveralls standing in front of a dilapidated garage with a sign that said Gary's Fix It and Quit It. He looked tired. He looked like a man who worked hard for very little money. There was no shame in that. The shame was in his daughter erasing him to play princess. According to Jessica, I continued walking slowly around the table, stalking her like prey. He is a Texas oil tycoon who is wiring $2 million to the Rivera estate as we speak. I clicked the remote. A document appeared on the screen. It was a bankruptcy filing from the state of Ohio. Dated 6 months ago. Gary Pawkorski listed assets of less than $5,000 and debts of over $50,000. However, I said the reality is slightly different. Mr. Pawkorski is a mechanic in Dayton, Ohio. He has filed for bankruptcy 3 times. He does not own an oil rig. He does not own a ranch. He owns a 1998 Ford Taurus with a transmission problem. Jessica let out a strangled sound. Stop it! She shrieked, lunging toward me. Turn it off! You are lying! Those are fake. I sidestepped her easily. She stumbled in her high heels, catching herself on the edge of the table. I clicked the remote again. A new document appeared. This one was a warrant. And this is Jessica Pawkorski, I said. Currently wanted in the state of Nevada for writing bad checks and credit card fraud. It seems the lifestyle of a rich heiress is expensive, especially when you are funding it with stolen identities. I turned to the guests who were now standing whispering, pointing at the screen. You see, ladies and gentlemen, Jessica is not the savior of the Rivera family. She is a fugitive. She is drowning in debt just like the people she married. She saw a desperate family, and she thought she found an easy mark. She thought if she married Eduardo, she could get her name on the deed to this vineyard before anyone checked her credit score. I walked up to Jessica. She was trembling, shaking so hard her jewelry rattled. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but beneath the hate was terror. My dear sister-in-law, I said, my voice dripping with ice. You called me a charity case. You made fun of my clothes. You tried to teach me how to use a fork. I leaned in close so only she and the family could hear the next part. But in the silence of the room, it carried anyway. You talked about oil, Jessica. But the only oil you have ever owned is the grease in the deep fryer at the Taco Bell where you were working 6 months ago. I have your employment records too. You were fired for stealing from the register. The insult landed like a physical blow. It stripped away the last layer of her pretense. She wasn't just exposed, she was flayed. Eduardo stood up. His face was purple. He looked at the screen. He looked at his wife. He looked at the lie he had married. You told me you had a trust fund. He roared, his voice cracking. You told me your father was sending the wire transfer tomorrow. I bought you that ring on credit because you said you would pay it off. Jessica turned to him, grabbing his lapels. Baby, listen to me, she pleaded. Her accent slipping, sliding from the affected mid-Atlantic drawl into a flat Ohio twang. She is lying. She photoshopped these. My daddy is rich. The money is coming, I swear. Liar. Eduardo screamed, shoving her away. She stumbled back, crashing into a waiter who was holding a tray of untouched desserts. Chocolate mousse splattered across her gold dress, ruining it instantly. You are nothing. He spat at her. You are trash. You are worse than her. He pointed at me, but the insult didn't land. I was bulletproof. Camilla stood up. She looked at Jessica with a disgust that was profound. This was the woman she had toasted. This was the woman she had embraced. This was the woman she had chosen over me. Get out of my sight, Camilla hissed. You filth. You dare to come into my house and lie to me. You dare to eat my food and drink my wine when you are nothing but a common thief. She raised her hand, and for a second, I thought she was going to strike Jessica. But she didn't. She turned her rage on her son. Eduardo, you idiot, she screamed. You married her. You brought this disaster into our home. You said she was an heiress. You said she would save us. I did not know, Eduardo wailed, looking like a child. She had the clothes. She knew the brands. Because she stole them, I interjected calmly, clicking the remote one last time. The screen went black. The show was over. But the physical toll was just beginning. Luis Rivera, the patriarch who had sat silently through the entire exchange, suddenly made a noise. It was a wet, gurgling sound. He clutched his chest. His face, which had been gray, turned a terrifying shade of blue. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He collapsed heavy and hard onto the table, scattering crystal glasses and silverware. Luis Camilla screamed, forgetting Jessica, forgetting me, forgetting everything but the man who was currently gasping for air on the tablecloth. The room erupted into chaos. Guests were shouting. Someone yelled for a doctor. I stood still. I watched them. I watched the family that had been so arrogant, so untouchable just 10 minutes ago, now reduced to a screaming, panicked mess. Eduardo was frozen, staring at his father. Alejandro was backing away, looking for an exit, his survival instinct overriding any sense of filial duty. Jessica was on the floor, covered in chocolate, sobbing about her dress. I pulled out my phone. I dialed 911. I need an ambulance, I said calmly, walking toward the exit. 1422 Vineyard Drive. Possible cardiac arrest. Male. 60 years old. I hung up. I looked at the scene one last time. It was a masterpiece of destruction, and I had painted it with the truth. I walked past the dais. I walked past the sobbing Camila. I walked past the gasping Luis. I did not stop to help. I was not a doctor. I was not family. And as they had reminded me so many times, I was just the help. And the help had finished her shift. I walked out of the great hall, leaving the sound of sirens wailing in the distance behind me. The night air was cool and sweet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of jasmine and victory. The vineyard was quiet. The vines stood in silent rows, unaware that their owners were currently imploding. I walked to the edge of the terrace. I looked out over the valley. It was mine, all of it. But I wasn't done yet. I had taken their pride. I had taken their lies. Now, I was going to take their home. I pulled out my phone again. I dialed Jean-Luc. Execute the eviction notice, I said. Have the security team meet me at the gate in 10 minutes. I want the locks changed before the ambulance leaves the driveway. Understood, Madam President, he replied. I hung up. I smoothed my dress. I checked my reflection in the glass of the terrace door. I looked expensive. I looked powerful. I looked like the woman who owned the place, because I was. The ambulance lights were painting the walls of the great hall in strobes of red and white. But the chaos inside the room had nothing to do with medical emergencies and everything to do with moral bankruptcy. Luis Rivera was being loaded onto a stretcher, his face covered by an oxygen mask, his chest rising and falling in shallow, terrified gasps. The paramedics were efficient, moving him toward the double doors, but the party did not stop. It just mutated. Alejandro stood in the center of the room, watching his father being wheeled away. For a moment I thought he might follow them. I thought he might show a flicker of humanity, a spark of concern for the man who had raised him. But he did not move toward the ambulance. He turned toward me. He looked at me, and he did not see a woman. He saw a lifeline. He saw the only person in the room who could stop the bleeding. He saw the checkbook he thought he could still manipulate. He ran a hand through his hair, ruining the perfect gelled style he had spent an hour on. He took a step toward me, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender that looked more like he was trying to ward off a blow. "Nia, baby, please listen to me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You are getting this all wrong. You are overreacting. You do not understand Spanish culture. You do not understand how we talk." I stood perfectly still. I held my ground like a statue carved from obsidian. I watched him sweat. It was a joke, he pleaded, switching to English, so the remaining investors could hear him, so he could try to salvage his reputation along with his bank account. I was joking with Eduardo. "It is just locker room talk. We say things we do not mean. It is just machismo. It is a game. I love you, Nia. You know I love you." He reached for me. His hand, clammy and trembling, tried to grasp my bare arm. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply looked at his hand until he dropped it, realizing that touching me was like touching a high-voltage wire. "A joke," I repeated, my voice flat. "You think calling me a racial slur is a joke? You think stealing $10,000 from my savings account is a punchline?" "No, no, no," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room looking for an ally, finding none. "I did not steal it. I borrowed it. For the necklace. For Mom. I was going to surprise you too. I was going to propose tonight, Nia. That is why I was so stressed. That is why I said those stupid things. I was just blowing off steam." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a ring. It was small. The diamond was cloudy. It looked like something he had picked up at a pawn shop an hour ago. "See?" he said, holding it up, his hand shaking so hard the ring rattled in its setting. "I bought this for you. With the money. It was all for you." The room went quiet again. A few of the guests looked at the ring, then at me. For a second I saw doubt in their eyes. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe I was the hysterical woman ruining a romantic gesture. Maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Alejandro saw the doubt too. He latched onto it. "Please, Nia," he begged, dropping to one knee. "Marry me. Let me make this right. We can fix this. We can pay off the debts together. We can run the vineyard. You are so smart. You can help me. Just say yes." I looked down at him. He looked pathetic. He looked like a worm trying to negotiate with a bird. I did not look at the ring. I looked at my phone, which was still connected to the room's audio system. "That is a lovely story, Alejandro," I said, my voice soft, almost gentle. "It is very romantic. There is just one problem." I tapped the screen of my phone. "I have a different story, and mine has a soundtrack." I pressed play. The speakers, which had just amplified the destruction of Jessica, now crackled to life again. The sound was crystal clear. It was the recording I had made on the terrace 3 hours ago. It was the sound of Alejandro's voice, not the pleading, desperate voice in the room, but the arrogant, laughing voice of a man who thought he had won. The audio filled the cavernous hall, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the terrified faces of the guests. "Yes, I got it. I told you I would get it. The idiot transferred it 2 minutes ago. She bought the whole story about the necklace. Can you believe it? She thinks she is saving the day." Alejandro froze on his knee. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a statue of a man realizing he was already dead. The recording continued, merciless. "She is so stupid. These black girls. They are so desperate for a little attention from a man with a last name." She looked at me with those big cow eyes and just handed over the cash. A collective gasp went through the room. I saw the bank representative from Wells Fargo physically recoil. I saw the distributor from the wine conglomerate cover her mouth with her hand. This was not a misunderstanding. This was hatred. This was racism. This was the ugly, rotting heart of the Rivera boy exposed for the world to see. I know. Listen, book the suite at the Hilton. The presidential. I will slip away after the toasts. My family will be too drunk to notice, and Nia will be in bed by 10. She is exhausted. I had her scrubbing floors all day. On the recording, Alejandro laughed. It was a cruel sound. "Yes, 10,000. It is enough for tonight and for that bracelet you wanted. I will bring cash. I love you, Sophia. See you in 3 hours. The recording ended with a sharp click. The silence that followed was heavy. It was final. It was the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. I looked down at Alejandro. He was still kneeling, but he was no longer proposing. He was cowering. Sophia, I said, my voice ringing like a bell. Is that the name of the jeweler? Or is that the name of the woman you were planning to meet while I slept in your servant quarters? Alejandro stood up, stumbling back. He dropped the ring box. It clattered across the floor, spinning away under a table. No one moved to pick it up. It was old tape, he lied, his voice a hoarse whisper. That was from years ago. That wasn't about you. I checked the timestamp, I said, holding up my phone. Today, 5:30 p.m., while I was in the library, while you were supposedly overcome with love for me. I turned to the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, this is the man who wants to manage your investments. This is the man who wants to distribute your wine. A man who steals from the woman sleeping in his bed to pay for a hotel room with another woman. A man who uses racial slurs to describe the person paying his bills. I looked at the bankers. I wonder, I mused. If he lies this easily to the woman he claims to love, how much is he lying to you about the yield of the harvest? How much is he lying about the inventory? The bank representative stood up. He smoothed his suit jacket. He looked at Alejandro with a mixture of disgust and professional detachment. We are pulling the line of credit, he announced, his voice cutting through the tension. Effective immediately. We will be auditing the books tomorrow morning. Do not touch a single piece of paper, Mr. Rivera. The distributor stood up next. We are voiding the contract, she said. Morality clause. Subsection 4. We do not do business with racists or fraudsters. Goodbye. One by one they stood. The power players of Napa Valley, the people the Riveras had spent 40 years trying to impress, turned their backs. They did not look at Camila. They did not look at Alejandro. They walked toward the door, their heels clicking on the marble, leaving the family alone in the wreckage of their own making. Camila was still sitting at the head table. She was watching her world dissolve. She watched the bankers leave. She watched the investors leave. She watched her son kneeling on the floor, exposed as a liar and a cheat. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the last, desperate gambit of a narcissist who has lost control. She stood up. She swayed. She put a hand to her forehead in a gesture that was so theatrical it belonged in a bad soap opera. My heart, she wailed. Oh, my heart, the stress. You are killing me. You are killing us all. She collapsed. It was a slow, controlled fall. She grabbed the tablecloth as she went down, pulling a silver candelabra with her. It crashed to the floor, sending wax and crystal flying. She landed on the rug, arranging her limbs in a pose of tragic suffering. She closed her eyes and let out a soft moan. Mama Alejandro screamed, scrambling toward her. Mama, wake up! Eduardo rushed to her side, fanning her face with a napkin. She is having a heart attack! Jessica shrieked, trying to deflect attention from her own exposure. Call the ambulance back! Call them back! I stood there. I did not move. I did not reach for my phone. I watched Camila peeking through her eyelashes, checking to see if anyone was rushing to save her. She was waiting for the sympathy. She was waiting for the guest to turn back, to rush to her aid, to blame the cruel girl who had caused this. But the guest did not turn back. They kept walking. They had seen the show. They knew a performance when they saw one. I walked over to where Camila lay on the floor. I stood over her. Camila, I said, my voice bored. You can get up now. The ambulance already left with your husband, and they are not coming back for a bad actress. She groaned louder, fluttering her eyelids. I leaned down close to her ear. Also, I whispered, the floor you are lying on, it is mine, and you are wrinkling the rug. Camila's eyes snapped open, the mask fell away. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated venom. She sat up, pushing Alejandro away. You are a demon, she hissed. You are the devil sent to destroy us. No, Camila, I said, straightening up and looking down at her. I am just the consequences of your actions, and gravity works fast on hypocrites. I turned away from them. I turned away from the sobbing mother, the cheating son, the thief daughter-in-law, and the coward brother. I walked toward the door where the last of the guests were filing out. The party was over. The house was empty, and the check had finally cleared. The great hall was emptying out, the echo of the slamming doors serving as the applause I had never asked for. The last of the investors had fled, their luxury sedans peeling out of the driveway as if the estate itself were contagious. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the ragged breathing of the Rivera family huddled together on the dais, like survivors on a life raft that was rapidly taking on water. Luis Rivera, who only moments ago had been clutching his chest in a theatrical display of cardiac distress, suddenly found the strength to stand. The miracle of rage had cured him. He pushed himself up from the table, his face flushed not with health, but with the violent purple of a man who realizes he has lost control of his kingdom. He looked at the wreckage of his anniversary party. He looked at his sobbing wife, his humiliated sons, and the fraudster daughter-in-law cowering in the corner. Then he looked at me. I was sitting calmly at the VIP table, swirling the last sip of vintage champagne in my glass. I looked expensive. I looked unbothered. I looked like I belonged there more than he did. "You," Luis spat, his voice trembling with fury. "You poison. You come into my house. You eat my food. And you destroy my family." He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get out. Get out of my house right now. If you are not gone in 30 seconds, I am calling the police. I will have you arrested for trespassing. I will have you arrested for harassment. I will spend every last cent I have to make sure you rot in a cell." I set my glass down on the table. It made a soft, decisive click against the wood. "Every last cent?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Luis, be reasonable. You do not have any cents left. You spent them all on a party for people who just walked out on you." "Do not speak to me," he roared, slamming his hand on the table. "You are nothing. You are a street rat my son picked up. Get out now." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers fumbling with the screen. "I am dialing the sheriff," he threatened. "He is a personal friend. He will drag you out by your hair." I watched him dial. I watched him hold the phone to his ear. I watched the realization dawn on his face as the call failed to connect. "Service interruption," I asked helpfully. "It happens when you do not pay the bill for 3 months. Or maybe I just had the tower signal jammed locally." "Security precaution." He stared at his phone, then threw it onto the table. It slid across the linen and fell to the floor with a crack. "Get out," he screamed, his voice raw. I stood up. I smoothed the silk of my gown. I picked up my clutch. "You want me to leave?" I asked. "Yes. And you want the police involved?" "Yes." I nodded slowly. "Okay, Luis. If you insist on involving the authorities, we can certainly do that. But before you throw me out, there is someone you need to meet." I pulled out my phone. I did not dial. I simply pressed a single button on the screen. It was a pre-programmed signal, a digital key turning in a lock. "Come in," I said into the silence of the room. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Riveras looked around confused. Alejandro wiped his nose, looking at the door with dread. Camila stopped sobbing to listen. Then the heavy oak double doors at the entrance of the great hall swung open. They did not creak. They did not hesitate. They opened with the smooth, heavy precision of a bank vault. Through them walked a phalanx. There were 6 of them, men and women in black suits so sharp they could cut glass. They carried leather briefcases. They wore earpieces. They moved with the synchronized, predatory grace of a pack of wolves that had just cornered a wounded deer. At the head of the pack was Jean-Luc, my chief legal officer. A man who smiled only when he was about to destroy a hostile takeover target. He was smiling now. He walked straight to my table, ignoring the Riveras completely. He placed a thick stack of files on the table next to my champagne glass. He bowed his head slightly. "Madam President," Jean-Luc said, his French accent thick and dangerous. "The filings are complete. The county clerk recorded the deed transfer at 4:59 p.m. The assets are secured." "Thank you, Jean-Luc," I said. Louis stumbled down the steps of the dais. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice losing its boom, replaced by the high-pitched whine of fear. "Who are these people? You cannot just walk in here. This is private property." Jean-Luc turned to him. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Luis the way an exterminator looks at a particularly stubborn termite. "Mr. Luis Rivera." Jean-Luc said, his voice calm and terrifyingly polite. "My name is Jean-Luc Dubois. I am the General Counsel for Apex Global Holdings. Apex Global, Alejandro whispered. He looked at his father. Papa, that is the firm, the investors, the ones we were trying to court. Luis looked confused. Yes. We sent them a proposal. We are waiting to hear back. Why are you here? Are you here to invest? Jean-Luc laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Invest? No, Mr. Rivera. We do not invest in sinking ships. We salvage them. He picked up the top file from the stack and opened it. As of this morning, Apex Global has acquired the entirety of your debt portfolio. We purchased the mortgage on this estate from the bank, which had already flagged it for foreclosure due to 12 months of missed payments. We purchased the business loans attached to the vineyard operations. We even purchased the high-interest predatory loan you took out yesterday to pay for the catering of this event. He gestured around the room with disdain. Luis shook his head. That is impossible. The bank would have told me. The bank has been trying to tell you for months, Jean-Luc corrected. You stopped answering their calls. You stopped opening their letters. You defaulted, Mr. Rivera. And when you default, your debt goes to the highest bidder. He handed the file to Luis. Luis took it. His hands were shaking so hard the papers rattled. And the highest bidder, Jean-Luc continued, was Madame Nia. Luis looked up from the papers. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, uncomprehending. You, he whispered. You work in HR. You drive a Honda. I laughed. I walked around the table and stood next to Jean-Luc. I drive a Honda because it is reliable, Luis. And I told you I work in acquisitions. I just didn't tell you I acquire companies. I acquire debt. And occasionally, when the mood strikes me, I acquire the homes of people who treat me like garbage. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Apex Global, I said, my voice ringing with authority. I am the mystery investor you have been desperate to meet. I am the woman you called a charity case, and I am the woman who just bought your life for pennies on the dollar. Camila let out a shriek. No, this is a lie. Alejandro, tell them it is a lie. She is poor. She is nobody. Alejandro was staring at me. He looked like he was trying to solve a math equation in a language he didn't speak. You have billions? He asked, his voice cracking. Assets under management, yes, I clarified. Personal net worth. Enough to buy this estate 10 times over and turn it into a parking lot if I wanted to. Why? He whispered. Why did you pretend? Because I wanted to know who you were, I said. I wanted to know if you loved me or if you just loved the idea of someone you could control. And you gave me my answer, Alejandro. You gave it to me in Spanish, loud and clear. I turned back to Luis. Jean-Luc, please explain the terms of the acquisition to Mr. Rivera. Certainly, Jean-Luc said. He pulled out another document. Because the debt exceeds the value of the assets, and because you personally guaranteed the loans with the estate as collateral, we have exercised our right to immediate foreclosure. The deed has been transferred. The title is now in the name of Apex Global. He paused for effect. This means, Mr. Rivera, that this house is no longer yours. The vineyard is no longer yours. The furniture is no longer yours. He pointed through the open doors to the driveway where Luis's prized vintage Rolls-Royce was parked. And that car, the one you used as collateral for the bridge loan in January, that is ours too. The tow truck is already at the gate. Luis dropped the file. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. You cannot do this, he gasped. We have rights, squatters' rights. We have lived here for 40 years. You are not squatters, Jean-Luc said coldly. You are trespassers. And as the new owner, Madame Nia has the right to remove you immediately. I stepped forward. I closed the distance between myself and Luis. You told me to get out, I said softly. You threatened to call the police. You wanted to throw me onto the street in the middle of the night. I looked at his face stripped of all its pride and bluster. So I am returning the favor. I pulled out my phone. Security, I said into the receiver. Clear the building. The 6 agents who had entered with Jean-Luc stepped forward. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to suck the air out of the room. Camila scrambled up from the floor. Wait. Wait. My jewelry. My clothes. You cannot take my things. Jean-Luc consulted a list. Personal effects such as clothing and toiletries may be removed, he said. However, any items of value, jewelry, art, electronics are considered assets of the estate and remain here to satisfy the outstanding debt. The diamond necklace you are wearing, Mrs. Rivera, I believe that was purchased with company funds in 2018. It stays. Camila clutched her throat. You are stealing from me. We are repossessing, Jean-Luc corrected. There is a difference. Take it off, I said. Camilla looked at me. She looked at the security guards. With trembling fingers, she unclasped the necklace. She dropped it into Jean-Luc's outstretched hand. The room was silent except for the sound of weeping. Jessica was crying. Camilla was crying. Alejandro was crying. Eduardo was the only one who moved. He lunged toward the table, grabbing a bottle of champagne. If I cannot have it, no one can, he screamed, raising the bottle to smash it. One of the security guards moved faster than I could blink. He caught Eduardo's wrist in midair. He twisted it. Eduardo dropped the bottle. The guard shoved him backward, and he fell onto the dais, landing at Jessica's feet. That is company property, the guard said, his voice flat. I looked at them. The Rivera dynasty. Broken, bankrupt, homeless. You have 30 minutes, I said. Pack your bags. Take only what you need. If I see anyone trying to smuggle a silver spoon or a watch, I will press charges for theft. And trust me, I have very good lawyers. I turned to Jean-Luc. Supervise them. I want them off the property by midnight. Yes, Madame President. I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear the sound of zippers. I could hear the sound of sobbing. I could hear the sound of a legacy ending. I walked out onto the terrace. The air was cool. The stars were bright. Below me, the vineyard stretched out, dark and silent. It was a mess. It was overgrown. It was diseased. But it was mine. And tomorrow I would start the replanting. I would tear out the rot. I would burn the dead wood. And I would grow something new. Something that didn't taste like bitterness and lies. I took a sip of my champagne. It tasted like justice. The silence that followed my declaration was shattered by the heavy tread of boots on hardwood floors. My private security team moved with the efficiency of a machine that had been calibrated for exactly this moment. They did not shout. They did not shove. They simply occupied the space, their physical presence sucking the oxygen out of the room and leaving the Riveras gasping for air. These were not the sleepy elderly gate guards the family had employed for decades. These were former military contractors on the Apex global payroll, men and women who had secured assets in war zones. Evicting a bankrupt family from a vineyard was light work for them. I stood at the base of the grand staircase, my hand resting casually on the newel post. I watched as Jean-Luc coordinated the operation. He checked his watch, a movement that was sharp and precise. 30 minutes, I announced, my voice cutting through the sound of weeping. You have exactly 30 minutes to vacate the premises. You may take clothing, toiletries, and essential personal documents. That is all. Everything else, furniture, art, electronics, jewelry, vehicles, and the wine in the cellar is now the property of Apex Global to satisfy the outstanding liens against the estate. Camilla looked at me with wild, red-rimmed eyes. She was still sitting on the floor where she had collapsed, her expensive dress ruined. You cannot do this, she wailed. My furs, my silver, the paintings my grandmother left me. Those paintings were appraised and used as collateral for a business loan. In 2019, Jean-Luc corrected her, not even looking up from his clipboard. A loan you defaulted on 6 months ago. They are not your paintings, Mrs. Rivera. They are the bank's paintings. And now they are ours. He snapped his fingers. 2 security guards stepped forward. Escort them to their rooms, Jean-Luc ordered. Supervise the packing. 1 suitcase per person. If you suspect them of concealing assets, search the bags. The humiliation was absolute. The Riveras were marched up their own staircase like prisoners. I watched them go. Alejandro looked back at me, once his eyes pleading, but I just checked the time on my phone. The clock was ticking. I did not follow them up. I did not need to see them frantically stuffing designer clothes into bags. I stayed in the foyer waiting. The front door stood open, letting in the cool night air. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the leaves of the oak trees that lined the driveway. A storm was coming. It felt appropriate. 20 minutes later, they began to trickle back down. Eduardo was first dragging a Louis Vuitton duffel bag that looked ready to burst. A security guard walked behind him carrying a small box. He tried to take the PlayStation and a box of Cuban cigars, the guard reported, handing the box to Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc opened it, inspected the contents, and set it on a side table marked Asset Recovery. No electronics, Jean-Luc said calmly. And the cigars are inventory, put them back. Eduardo threw his bag down. This is theft, he screamed. I bought that console with my own money. Money you borrowed from the company accounts I noted from my spot by the stairs, which means you bought it with my money. Goodbye, Eduardo. Wait outside. He glared at me, impotent rage trembling in his hands before storming out the front door. Alejandro came next. He was carrying 2 suitcases. He looked defeated. He had stripped off his tuxedo jacket and loosened his tie. He looked like a man who had just finished a 12-hour shift at a job he hated. He stopped in front of me. Nia, he started, his voice cracking. Where am I supposed to go? I have no cash. My cards are frozen. You took everything. I did not take anything, Alejandros, I said. I just stopped giving. There is a difference. As for where you go, I believe the Hilton has a lovely lobby. You can sit there and wait for Sophia. Maybe she will pay for your room. He flinched. He opened his mouth to argue, to beg to try one last desperate manipulation, but the security guard behind him stepped forward. Outside, sir, the guard said. Alejandro lowered his head and walked out into the night. Then came the lights. Blue and red strobe lights flashed through the open front door, bouncing off the crystal chandelier and painting the foyer in the colors of emergency. A siren wailed short and sharp, cutting off as a vehicle pulled up right to the front steps. Camilla and Jessica were just coming down the stairs. Camilla was leaning on Jessica, sobbing dramatically into a handkerchief. Jessica was struggling with 3 oversized bags, her face a mask of panic. The police! Camilla gasped, clutching the banister. Thank God Luis called them. They are here to stop this. They are here to arrest this woman. She pointed a shaking finger at me, a spark of hope igniting in her eyes. She thought the cavalry had arrived. She thought her status, her name, and her husband's connections still meant something in this valley. I watched the police officers step out of the cruiser. There were 2 of them. They were not the local sheriff deputies that Luis played golf with. They wore the uniforms of the state police, and they were not looking at me. They walked briskly up the steps, their hands resting near their belts. They stepped into the foyer, ignoring Camilla completely. They looked at the group gathered at the bottom of the stairs. Is there a Jessica Parker here? The lead officer asked, his voice booming in the high-ceilinged space. Jessica froze. The bag slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a heavy thud. She tried to shrink behind Camilla, tried to make herself small, but there was nowhere to hide. I am Jessica Rivera, she squeaked. Ma'am, we have a warrant for your arrest issued by the state of Nevada, the officer said, stepping forward. Counts of identity theft, credit card fraud, and grand larceny. We also have a federal detainer regarding wire fraud charges pending in Ohio. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Jessica Pokorsky, you are under arrest, Camilla screamed. She scrambled away from Jessica as if her daughter-in-law had suddenly caught fire. What? Camilla shrieked. Fraud arrest. Jessica began to back away, her hands raised. No, there is a mistake. My daddy is fixing this. The money is coming. Nia did this. She hacked my records. The officer did not care about her excuses. He grabbed her wrist, spun her around, and clicked the cuffs into place. The sound was mechanical and final. You have the right to remain silent, he recited, marching her toward the door. Jessica struggled, her heels skidding on the marble. Eduardo, she screamed toward the open door. Eduardo, help me. Call Daddy. Call someone. Eduardo was standing on the porch. He watched his wife being dragged out in handcuffs. He did not move. He did not speak. He just watched a look of dull shock on his face as she was shoved into the back of the police cruiser. Camilla stood alone on the stairs. She looked at the open door where her daughter-in-law had just vanished. She looked at the pile of luggage that Jean-Luc was currently searching for contraband silver. She looked at me. The reality of her situation finally crashed down on her. There was no savior coming. There was no oil money. There was no prestige left to protect. There was only the cold, hard fact that she was homeless, her husband was in the hospital, and her son was a fraud. And the only person with any power in the room was the woman she had treated like a servant for 48 hours. She walked down the last few steps. Her legs were shaky. She looked old. The bright red dress that had seemed so aggressive earlier now just looked garish and sad. She approached me. She did not stand tall. She did not sneer. Slowly, painfully, Camila Rivera sank to her knees. It was not a theatrical faint like in the dining room. This was genuine surrender. She knelt on the marble floor, her expensive dress pooling around her hands clasped together as if in prayer. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup, turning her into a grotesque mask of sorrow. "Nia," she choked out. She spoke in English. It was the first time she had addressed me directly in English without an insult attached. "Nia, please, I am begging you, look at us. We have nothing. Luis is sick. Jessica is a criminal. We have nowhere to go." She reached out, trying to touch the hem of my dress. I took a step back. "Nia, daughter." She wept, using the word she had withheld from me, the word she had mocked. "I am sorry. I was wrong. I was stressed. The debt. It made me crazy. But we are family. Alejandro loves you. We can be a family. You can help us. You have so much. Please, do not throw us out into the street. Be the bigger person. Be my daughter." The lobby was silent. The security guards watched impassively. Jean-Luc paused his inventory. Everyone waited for my answer. I looked down at her. I saw the fear. I saw the desperation. But I also saw the woman who had forced me to scrub her floors. I saw the woman who had laughed when her son called me a racial slur. I saw the woman who had served me contaminated food and threatened to leave me at a bus station. She wanted mercy. She wanted me to validate her sudden convenient realization of our family bond. She wanted to use my blackness, my capacity for forgiveness, the stereotype of the strong, enduring black woman who carries the world's burdens against me. She wanted me to save her because she thought that is what I was built for. I took a deep breath. I looked her in the eye, and I answered her. But I did not speak English. I did not give her the comfort of her own language. I spoke Spanish, the language she had used to hurt me, the language she had used to exclude me. "Señora Camila." I said, my voice soft but echoing with the weight of a judge's gavel. "You said earlier that I had the mind of a child. You said I did not belong at the main table. You said I was a charity case." I leaned down, bringing my face level with hers so she could see the absolute lack of pity in my eyes. "You are right about one thing, Camila," I continued in flawless, biting Spanish. "I do not belong at your table, because your table is rotten, and you are right about the family. We are not family. Family does not feed you cockroaches. Family does not steal from you." She sobbed louder, trying to interrupt, but I talked over her. "You say you are sorry. You say we are family now because you need my money. But yesterday I was just a morena to you. Yesterday I was dirt. I stood up straight, towering over her kneeling form. You said I wasn't good enough for your son," I said, delivering the final blow. "And you were right. I am not good enough for him. I am too good for him. I am too good for all of you. I do not deserve this," I said, gesturing to the pathetic tableau of her ruin. "I do not deserve to carry your baggage, and I certainly do not deserve to tolerate trash in my house." I turned to the head of my security detail. "Remove her," I said in English. Camila screamed as the guards lifted her by her arms. "No, Nia, please!" They dragged her toward the door. Her heels scraped against the floor, leaving black scuff marks on the white marble. "You are the trash I called after her in Spanish, and today is garbage day." They threw her out. They literally threw her out. I watched as they deposited her on the front steps next to her luggage. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off her wails. The silence rushed back into the foyer. It was clean. It was pure. Jean-Luc stepped forward. "The house is clear, Madame President. The locks are being changed now. The perimeter is secure." "Thank you, Jean-Luc," I said. I looked around the empty hall. It was just a house. It was just wood and stone and glass. It wasn't a dynasty. It wasn't a legacy. It was just an asset. And now it was a clean slate. I walked to the door and looked out through the peephole. I could see them huddled in the driveway. The wind was whipping their clothes. The rain had started to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked them to the bone. Eduardo was yelling at the closed gate. Alejandro was sitting on his suitcase, his head in his hands. Camilla was staring at the house looking like a ghost who had just been exorcised. I locked the deadbolt. I turned off the foyer lights. I walked back toward the kitchen. I was hungry. And this time I was going to cook for myself. And I was going to use the good saffron. The rain had turned the driveway into a river of mud and misery. I sat in the back of the armored SUV Jean-Luc had summoned for me, watching the windshield wipers slice through the downpour. The interior was warm, smelling of leather and safety, a stark contrast to the cold, wet reality waiting just beyond the tinted glass. We were creeping toward the main gates, the heavy iron barriers that now marked the line between my property and the rest of the world. Through the rain-slicked window I saw them. The Rivera family huddled under the branches of an old oak tree just outside the gate, their luggage piled around them like sandbags against a flood. Camilla was sitting on a suitcase, a plastic bag over her hair, weeping into her hands. Eduardo was pacing, shouting into a phone that I knew wasn't connecting. And Alejandro was standing in the middle of the road, staring at the house. He looked like a drowned rat. His tuxedo shirt was plastered to his skin, translucent and sad. His hair, usually so perfect, was plastered to his skull. He was shivering not just from the cold, but from the shock of a reality that had hit him like a freight train. As my car approached, the headlights swept over him. He blinked, shielding his eyes. Then recognition dawned. He saw me, or rather he saw the car leaving the estate, and he knew it was me. He didn't move out of the way. He lunged. He ran toward the moving vehicle, his arms waving frantically. My driver, a former Special Forces operator named Marcus, didn't even flinch. He just tapped the brakes, bringing the heavy SUV to a smooth, intimidating halt, inches from Alejandro's knees. "Please," Alejandro screamed, his voice muffled by the glass and the rain. "Nia, please, stop!" He slammed his hands against the hood of the car. He scrambled around to the side, grabbing the door handle, yanking on it futilely. It was locked, of course. It was always locked. He pressed his face against my window. His breath fogged the glass. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and terrified. He looked like a man who was drowning, and I was the only piece of driftwood in the ocean. "Nia," he begged, pounding on the glass with his fist. "Open the window. Just talk to me. Please, I love you. I swear I love you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked me, the man who had used me, the man who had planned to cheat on me tonight. I pressed the button on the armrest. The window slid down with a quiet electric hum. The sound of the rain rushed in, loud and violent. A spray of cold water hit my face, but I didn't blink. Alejandro thrust his hands through the opening, trying to grab me, trying to touch me. "Nia." Thank God, he gasped, water dripping from his nose. "Baby, listen. This is a mistake. A horrible mistake. I don't know what came over me in there. I was scared. The debt, the pressure, it made me crazy. But I love you. You have to believe me." He was crying now, real tears mixing with the rain. "I didn't mean those things I said to my mother," he sobbed. I was just trying to impress her. You know how she is. She is impossible." I had to say what she wanted to hear, but in my heart, Nia, it has always been you. Since the moment you walked into the coffee shop. Since the moment I saw you. He was rewriting history again. We didn't meet in a coffee shop. We met at a networking event where he had spilled a drink on me, and I had apologized. He didn't even know how we met. "You are the love of my life," he shouted over the thunder. "We can fix this. You have the money now. You have the power. Imagine what we could do together. We could run this place. King and queen. I will be better. I will be the man you deserve. Just open the door. Let me in." "It is cold, Nia. I am scared." I watched him. I watched the desperation contort his handsome face into something ugly and pathetic. He was performing. Even now in the rain with his life in ruins, he was trying to run a game. He thought if he said the right words, if he cried hard enough, if he promised me the world, I would revert to the quiet, grateful girl he thought he knew. He thought he could charm his way out of an eviction. I reached into my purse. Alejandro's eyes followed my hand. Hope flared in them. He thought I was reaching for the door lock. He thought I was reaching for a checkbook. I pulled out a $1 bill. It was crisp. It was green. It was worth less than the air in his tires used to be. I held it out to him. He stopped crying. He stared at the money, confused. "What is this?" he whispered. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice low, so he had to lean in to hear me over the storm. "This is a tip, Alejandro," I said. "A tip," he repeated, the rain running into his open mouth. "Yes," I said, "for the performance." It was terrible. Honestly, the worst acting I have ever seen. You overplayed the "I love you" part. It lacked nuance. And the tears a bit much. I shoved the bill into his shirt pocket. It stuck out limp and wet against his soaked chest. "But I admire the effort," I continued. "You really committed to the bit. Even when the stage was collapsing." "Nia, no," he choked out, reaching for me again. "Don't do this. I have nowhere to go. My cards are frozen. My friends won't answer. I have nothing." "That is not entirely true," I said. "You have a reservation." He blinked. "What?" "The Hilton," I reminded him. "The presidential suite. You booked it for tonight, remember? With my money. Or the money you thought was mine." He looked down, shame coloring his cheeks. I can't go there. I can't pay for it." "Oh, you don't have to worry about the bill," I said, a small, cruel smile playing on my lips. "The reservation was flagged, but that is not the problem. The problem is Sophia." "Sophia?" he asked, the name coming out as a terrified squeak. "Yes, Sophia," I said. "My security team. They are very thorough." When I flagged the transfer as fraudulent, I also took the liberty of notifying the local authorities about some suspicious activity at the hotel, specifically in the room booked under the name Alejandro Rivera. His eyes widened until I thought they might pop out of his head. "Suspicious activity," he whispered. I nodded. "It seems Sophia was tired of waiting for you. And when the police arrived to investigate the credit card fraud, well, let's just say they found more than just a maxed-out Visa in her purse. They found a significant amount of controlled substances. And since the room is in your name," I let the sentence hang there, heavy and suffocating. "She is at the county jail right now, Alejandro," I said. "And she is very, very eager to talk to you. She keeps telling them that the drugs belong to her boyfriend, the boyfriend who booked the room, the boyfriend who promised to bring cash." Alejandro grabbed the window frame. His knuckles were white. You set me up," he gasped. "I didn't set you up," I said coldly. "I just turned on the lights. You are the one who filled the room with roaches." I looked at my driver. Marcus caught my eye in the rearview mirror. He nodded. "Nia, wait!" Alejandro screamed, realizing the window was starting to go up. "Wait! You can't leave me here. The police will come for me." I looked at him one last time through the narrowing gap. "Then you better start running, Alejandro," I said. "I hear the cardio is good for stress." The window sealed shut with a soft thud, cutting off his voice. "Drive," I said to Marcus. The SUV accelerated. I didn't look back, but I could hear him. Even through the soundproof glass, even through the roar of the engine and the pounding rain, I could hear him. He was screaming my name. He was screaming for his mother. He was screaming at the sky. We rolled past the gate. The security guard saluted as we passed. We turned onto the main road, leaving the Rivera estate behind in the darkness. I settled back into the leather seat. I took a deep breath. The air in the car was filtered and clean. It didn't smell of desperation anymore. I picked up my phone. I had one more call to make, one more loose end to tie up. I dialed the number for the county sheriff's non-emergency line. "Yes," I said when the dispatcher answered. "I would like to report a trespasser at 1422 Vineyard Drive." "Yes, a man. He seems agitated, possibly dangerous. He is screaming at the gate." "Thank you." I hung up. I closed my eyes. I pictured Alejandro running in the rain, his tuxedo ruined, his pockets empty except for a $1 bill, sirens wailing in the distance, coming not to save him, but to collect him. It was harsh. It was brutal. It was exactly what he would have done to me if our positions were reversed. He had wanted to leave me with nothing. He had wanted to break me. Instead, he had forged me. The car sped up, carrying me away from the wreckage of my past and toward the empire I was building. The rain battered the roof, washing the world clean, preparing the soil for whatever I decided to plant next. And for the first time in 6 months, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like the storm. The morning sun hit the limestone facade of the estate differently now. It did not glare, it did not oppress. It illuminated. 1 month ago, this building had been a mausoleum of debt and deception, a fortress built to keep people like me out. Now the heavy iron gates stood open. The security guards were still there, but they were not guarding a hoard of stolen wealth. They were guarding the future. I stood in what used to be Luis Rivera's private study. The dark, heavy drapes that smelled of cigars and stagnation were gone. I had ripped them down myself. The windows were open, letting in the breeze from the valley. The massive mahogany desk where Luis had signed fraudulent loan documents had been replaced by a sleek glass table covered in blueprints and grant applications. Jean-Luc stood in the doorway holding a tablet. He looked different too. Less like a shark, more like a satisfied gardener who had just finished weeding a particularly overgrown patch of dirt. The quarterly projections are in, Madam President, he said. The rebranding is complete. The market response to the acquisition has been overwhelmingly positive. They like the new direction. I walked over to the window. Below me, the courtyard was buzzing with activity. It was not a party for the idle rich. It was a workshop. 20 women sat at tables arranged in the sun. They were black. They were Latina. They were Asian. They were women who had been told they were too loud, too ambitious, or too poor to succeed. They were the first cohort of the Apex Incubator. I was giving them seed capital. I was giving them mentorship. And I was giving them the one thing the Riveras had never given anyone: a chance. Beyond them in the gardens, a group of children were learning about soil chemistry. They were kids from the inner-city schools in Oakland, kids who had never seen a vineyard before. They were getting their hands dirty, not as servants, but as scientists. "It looks good, Jean-Luc," I said. "It looks alive." He swiped a finger across his tablet. "I also have the update you requested on the previous tenants." I turned from the window. I did not need to hear this. I had won. But a small part of me, the part that had scrubbed those floors while they laughed, wanted to know that justice was sticking. "Tell me," I said. Jean-Luc kept his voice neutral, professional. "Luis and Camila Rivera have relocated to a one-bedroom apartment in Vallejo. It is a walk-up. 4th floor. No elevator. Luis has taken a job with a landscaping crew. He mows lawns for the estates he used to visit for dinner." I nodded. Poetic. "And Camila?" "She is working housekeeping at a Motel 6 off the interstate," Jean-Luc said. "Apparently she was fired from her first job at a department store for trying to correct a customer's pronunciation. The motel manager says she complains a lot, but she needs the money. They have no savings. The seizure of assets was total." "And the boys?" "Eduardo is working the night shift at an Amazon fulfillment center," Jean-Luc said. "He packs boxes. He tried to sell his story to a tabloid, but they passed. Without Jessica, the scandal wasn't juicy enough. Speaking of Jessica, she is still awaiting trial in Nevada. Her bail was denied." I looked at the clean surface of my desk. I thought about the way Jessica had grabbed my wrist. I thought about the way Camila had looked at me. "And Alejandro?" I asked. Jean-Luc paused. He hesitated for the first time. "He is here, madame. Or rather, he is near here." "What do you mean?" "He got a job as a busboy at the diner down the road, the one where the truck drivers eat. He works the lunch rush. He has been seen standing by the road watching the cars go in and out of the estate. He tells people he used to be the prince of this castle." "And what do they say?" "They tell him to refill their coffee," Jean-Luc said. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. They were gone. They were not dead. They were not in physical pain. But they were living the reality they had tried to force on me. They were invisible. They were serving others. They were struggling. "Send a bonus to the landscaping crew Luis works for," I said. "An anonymous tip. $500. Jean-Luc raised an eyebrow. "Merci, madame." "No," I said. "Reality. I want him to know what it feels like to need a handout. I want him to stare at that money and know he didn't earn it. It will hurt his pride more than starvation ever could." Jean-Luc smiled, a terrifying expression. "Very well." He left the room, closing the door softly. I walked out onto the balcony. This was the same balcony where Alejandro had planned to smoke cigars with his father and laugh about how they had swindled me. Now it was the headquarters of a revolution. I looked down at the vineyard. The dead vines had been torn out. The soil had been tilled. We were planting a new varietal, something resilient, something that could survive the drought and the heat. On the table next to me sat a bottle of wine. It was the first bottle from the new label. The label was simple black and gold. No family crest, no pretentious coat of arms. It just had one word: verdad. Truth. I poured a glass. The liquid was dark, rich, ruby red. I swirled it. It smelled of earth and blackberries and hard work. I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Hola, mi nieta, a voice cracked on the other end. It was frail but sharp as a tack. My grandmother. The woman who had taught me Spanish before I could walk. The woman who had been a diplomat in 3 countries and raised me when my parents died. Hola, abuela, I said, speaking the language of my heart. The language the Riveras thought was theirs alone. How is the new house, she asked. It is big, abuela, I said. It is very big. But I am filling it. I have 20 women here today. They are brilliant. They are going to change the world. And the ghosts, she asked. The people who lived there before. Are they gone? They are gone, I said, taking a sip of the wine. It tasted perfect. They are just shadows now. Good, she said. Never let ghosts rent space in your head, Nia. You charge too much for rent. I laughed. It felt good. It felt real. I have a question, abuela, I said. Ask. You always told me that silence is a weapon. You told me to listen more than I speak. Yes. But you never told me what to do after the silence ends. My grandmother chuckled. A dry, rasping sound. Oh, Nia, she said. After the silence ends, you do not have to do anything. The silence does the work for you. It amplifies the truth. When you finally speak, it sounds like thunder, because the world has been waiting for the storm. I looked out over the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and fire. I saw the cars of my new colleagues leaving the gate. I saw the lights of the incubator turning on downstairs. I saw a future that belonged to me not because I had inherited it, but because I had seized it. You were right, abuela, I said. It sounded like thunder. I hung up the phone. I finished the wine. I stood at the railing looking down at the road. Far in the distance I could see the diner Jean-Luc had mentioned. I could imagine Alejandro there wiping tables, his hands smelling of grease, his dreams shrinking down to the size of a tip jar. He had wanted a maid. He had wanted a fool. He had wanted a silent partner. He had gotten exactly what he asked for. He just didn't realize that the silence wasn't submission, it was a countdown. I turned my back on the road. I turned my back on the Riveras. I walked back into my office where the blueprints were waiting. My name is Nia. I am the president of Apex Global. I speak 4 languages, and I am done listening. Now it is time to build. Nia's journey teaches us that silence is never submission. It is a strategic weapon. While the Riveras focused on performative wealth and cruelty, Nia possessed the ultimate power, ownership, and unshakable self-worth. She proved that dignity isn't about demanding respect from those incapable of giving it, but about knowing your value even when others try to diminish it. When people reveal their true colors because they believe you are powerless, let them. True strength lies in the patience to wait for the right moment to speak, ensuring that when you finally do, your actions thunder far louder than their empty words. If you believe in the power of silent strength and justice served, hit like and subscribe for more stories of triumph.